Sports Boston's Trenni joins us to remember two giants in the world of sports, Congolese-American NBA Hall of Famer Dikembe Mutombo.
The U.S. warned it of an impending attack. Israeli military chief spokesman Daniel Hagari said that any Iranian fire on Israel will have, quote, consequences. He did not expand on what that may look like. The White House said it was actively supporting defense preparations to defend Israel against this attack. The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem has directed all government employees and their family members to shelter in place until further notice. Civilians in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv have been put under stricter restrictions, including new limits on gatherings in any urban centers. Hadil Al-Shalchi, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
At least 130 people have been killed by Hurricane Helene across the southeastern U.S. Hundreds of people are missing in North Carolina and Tennessee. State authorities are trying to cope with catastrophic damage. NPR's Mara Eliason reports the devastation has already become embroiled in election politics.
President Biden is planning to travel to North Carolina tomorrow to see the damage. He reacted angrily to former President Donald Trump's accusation that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp had a hard time reaching the White House. President Biden told reporters Trump was lying.
Let me get this straight. He's lying. And the governor told him he was lying.
He said he'd spoken with Kemp over the weekend and that his administration was doing everything possible to help victims of what he called a history-making storm. More than 100 people have been killed in 6 states. Vice President Harris changed her travel plans yesterday, returning to Washington to get a briefing at FEMA headquarters. Mara Eliason, NPR News.
Tonight is the only scheduled debate between the vice presidential nominees. CBS is hosting the event between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. Walz says the debate will highlight the contrast between the candidates. NPR's Stephen Fowler reports advisors to Vance say they expect him to go on offense.
In a debate preview call, Vance campaign operatives teased their focus for the debate includes attacking Walz's retirement from the National Guard and painting him as too extreme for voters, among other things. It'll be the most high-stakes moment yet for the Ohio senator, who has only held political office for less than 2 years. While many debates, especially for vice president, fail to move the needle much politically, tonight offers a chance for J.D. Vance to push past a steady stream of negative headlines that have dogged him since his selection in July. He has one of the lowest favorability ratings of any VP pick in recent history. Stephen Fowler, NPR News, Washington.
On Wall Street, the Dow is down 257 points. The Nasdaq is down more than 300. This is NPR.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Former President Jimmy Carter makes history today as the first commander-in-chief to turn 100 years old. Carter served from 1977 to 1981. He's known for the time he spent volunteering and advocating for the nonprofit Habitat for Humanity. President and CEO of the Greater Boston branch, Jim Kostaris, says Carter continues to inspire their mission for housing rights.
We think we can honor President Carter's birthday by doing what we do every day, which is working side by side with volunteers to build good homes and create home ownership opportunities for local families.
The latest data from 2019 found that Habitat for Humanity served around 7 million families per year around the world and in the U.S. And happy birthday, Jimmy Carter. With over 45,000 dock workers at 14 ports on strike, consumers are beginning to wonder what goods they will see shortages of. According to the Boston Business Journal, if the strike lasts just a day, a shortage of goods would not be noticeable to a typical consumer, but it would take about 5 days to straighten out the supply chain. A week-long strike would be a different story. Consumers would definitely see some empty shelves, and affected would be everything from bananas and cherries to chocolate, meat, fish, and cheese, not to mention a disruption in some prescription drugs. BBJ says if that strike were to last a month or more, supplies needed by factories would also start to run out. Cloudy mid-60s today. We are at 66 degrees outside our studios here in Brighton. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Wallace Foundation, working to develop and share practices that can improve learning and enrichment for young people and the vitality of the arts for everyone. Ideas and information at wallacefoundation.org.
You're listening to Boston Public Radio. I am Jim Browdy. Sue O'Connell is in for Marjorie Egan. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Good day to you.
We have no idea where Marjorie is. We just know she's back in a couple of days. We're broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com facebook.com/GBH News. So it's a politics-heavy day on BPR. Our text topic of the day, as you just heard from Henry, former President Carter turns 100 today, the first president to hit that milestone. We're celebrating his life with your memories of his time in office and his incredible accomplishments after. You can text us at 877-301-8970. We'll read some of them right before the 1 o'clock news. So today at 9 o'clock, which is far too late. I understand you do it for the California people, but I mean, it's ridiculous.
You can do it, Jim.
I don't know about that. Vice President, how long is it, by the way? An hour?
90 minutes.
90 minutes. Too long also. Vice presidential hopefuls Tim Walz and J.D. Vance will take the stage together just 5 weeks until the election. Unlike the presidential debates of recent history, Walz and Vance's mics will not be muted, so witness a media-trained cable news staple, J.D. Vance, face off against someone who much of the country had never even heard of until he was picked. That would be Coach Tim Walz. Tonight's debate, of course, is set against the backdrop of domestic disaster in the South, where Hurricane Helene wrought destruction and death, escalating war in the Middle East, dock workers strike, etc. So what are you watching for tonight? Actually, I shouldn't start that way. Are you even watching tonight? And will tonight's debate matter? That's the age-old question about vice presidential debates. 877-301-8970. Why don't you answer all 11 of those questions?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, the debate does matter because it may be the last debate voters
Excellent
get
point.
to see. Usually there's a presidential debate
Excellent
again.
point. Yes, indeed.
It also matters because even though we know these people, and many people know J.D. Vance from, who's only been in office a couple of years, by the way, from his best-selling book and the movie that was made, Hillbilly Elegy. Most people do not know who either one of these men are. So if you're even like a good information level voter, you may want to check this out just so you can get an impression of the two of them. And you know, the number one rule for vice presidents as candidates,
do no harm.
Do no harm. So we'll see what happens if they actually engage with each other which could be risky for each of them, each of their tickets, or if they just kind of hold back and try and spout whatever their campaigns think is the most important for them to do.
I can't remember, and I bet you do, when Vance has been confronted with, you called him Hitler not too long ago, and now he's the great, he only hoped for the nation. What does he say caused the 180?
He just changed it. He just completely changes the subject.
So
and talks
tonight's
about
going to be
something
tougher
else.
for him to do that kind of thing.
Well, I think so. I mean, again, I know that Walz has been prepped by Pete Buttigieg. And
One of the smartest people on the planet.
I've been listening to a bunch of interviews with Secretary Buttigieg, who is saying things like, the goal here, as it was with Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, is for Walz not to go down any alleys or offshoots, to address whatever the wrong thing or misinformation or whatever that J.D. Vance says, and then get right back onto topic. So that's a hard thing to do.
Sort of what Harris did,
right?
Actually.
And Harris did it brilliantly, but it's a hard thing to do. And for J.D. Vance, you know, I say this, and I really don't mean to sound snarky, but he can't be creepy. Right?
Yeah.
He comes across as creepy. He has to be not creepy.
Well, you know, he's a fairly smart guy. He's actually a very smart guy. And he does the lying thing just like Trump. But it's a lot easier to lie when you're just talking to reporters and your lying has been normalized as compared to when there's two moderators and an opponent. Even though, you know, the fact they're going to straddle the difference between the CNN debate where they didn't do any fact checking and the ABC debate where they did a lot of fact checking. This ridiculous idea, it's a CBS News debate. Only on CBS, not on all the other stations that carry it, there'll be a QR code. And what you're supposed to do as a viewer is look at the QR code with your phone, and there'll be 20 people doing fact checking, and you're supposed to be looking at that at the same time you're watching. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but I don't know what the answer is. I mean, that's the other challenge.
The answer is do what ABC did. I thought they did it very skillfully, and the reason there was more fact checking of Trump because he lies more. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. By the way, speaking of lying, and we'll get to your calls sooner at 877-301-8970. What are you thinking about tonight? Are you even going to watch tonight? What are you looking for? Yesterday, and I know you just shouldn't be shocked, I'm watching CNN and Trump is standing up there. You will play this in a second, talking about how horrible the storms are. Biden's done nothing. And when I hear it, I go, how how could the Biden people be so stupid not to be reaching out to all the governors, even if they're Republicans? And then I learned my lesson, which is you never believe anything that crosses Trump's lips. Here's Trump, and then the governor of Georgia, a Republican who supports Trump's candidacy. Here's Trump, then Kemp.
The governor's doing a very good job. He's having a hard time getting the president on the phone. I guess they're not being responsive.
I just spoke. The president just called me yesterday afternoon. I missed him and called him right back. And he just said, hey, what do you need? And I told him, you know, we got what we need. We'll work through the federal process. He offered that if there's other things we need, just to call him directly, which I appreciate that.
Is that, I mean, I know nothing should shock one about the pathological lying nature of Donald Trump. Oh, the governor's had a hard time reaching him, not helping. And Kemp, to his credit, by the way, this is what grown-ups do, even though he doesn't agree with Biden. He praised him for reaching out to him and thanked him for saying, call me if you need anything.
Right, and the other part of this is the dis and misinformation that's all over social media. Some of it, I imagine, is we've learned about how the Russians are really very much enjoying getting people to repeat what they say.
Right. You're right.
And over the weekend, I saw a number of tweets that were retweeted by apparently normal, actual human beings saying that the FEMA was nowhere to be found, that the media wasn't covering the hurricane at all, that nobody from the National Guard was on the ground, and taking a clip of Joe Biden answering something, saying that they had everything they need, when what he said right before that was, we prepared before the storm hit in order to get materials on their way there. Now, I think we should be very skeptical all the time of government's reaction to emergencies and crises. Being skeptical is not the same as falling hook, line, and sinker. All you need to do is Google news coverage of, and you will see all of the things. So before you retweet something, just Google it. We have this amazing machine called the internet. Just Google it. It will give you the answers before you repeat mis or disinformation.
The number is 877-301-8970. What would you like to hear them address tonight? My threshold issue for me is they're even going to watch. I think, sort of, if you believe in small d democracy, it seems to me is sort of an obligation, and a double obligation, as Sue said, because I believe every vice presidential debate in history, and there haven't been that many, I think there have been 11 or 12, I think every single, in fact, I'm quite sure, every single one has been followed by a presidential debate. That will not happen this time, as Sue said. So it's sort of like the closing argument, the only closing argument where both sides will be represented is tonight.
Also say that, it's always important. The vice president has one job, and that's to take over if something terrible happens to the president or the president can't serve.
And break tie votes, which she did a lot. Kamala Harris did a lot in the Senate. Those are the two.
The two jobs. So we've just had 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump.
That's a very good point.
He's a very old man. And to your point, we've also, going to have a divided Congress again if the Democrats are lucky. So those are the 2 things that the vice president has to be able to do, and you should evaluate whether these candidates are up for the job.
Anonymous texter starts by saying, I know you need to watch the debate for work, but the best show tonight is going to be Liberty versus the Aces in Brooklyn. That'd be the WNBA. 877-301-8970. Let's start with Jill in Somerville. Hi, Jill. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a solution to the fact-checking.
What is it?
You know those really loud quiz show buzzers?
That'd be great.
You just buzz it, and then people who don't want to look it up will at least know there was a lie, and the other people will know it's time to look up the QR code.
That is brilliant. That is really brilliant,
because
Jill.
we know
I
in
love
advance
that.
what
Thanks
the lies
for
are
calling.
going to be. I mean, we actually do know what the lies are going to be and what the shadings are going to be and what the lack of context is going to be. So, Jill, I think just solved the problem.
I don't agree with you. I agree that Jill solved the problem. I think you have to be Donald Trump and be, what's the word I'm looking for? Donald Trump, to lie when you know that there are 2 journalists and an opponent across. I don't think Vance has. Is Vance going to lie about the Haitian thing in Springfield, Ohio?
Maybe.
When there's 3 people there who are going to, I don't know about the moderators, when Tim Walz is going to tell the truth?
Vance has been being, I'm looking this up because I want to get the name right, but Vance is being trained. We know that Buttigieg is training Walz, but Vance is being trained by a lawyer who has been, there have been reports that she is telling him to lie as much as you could, like you're in a courtroom and you're just going to keep saying things and saying things and saying things. And as we know, judge will say, just because it's said in the courtroom and presented as evidence doesn't mean it's true. And that's the tack that he's going to take. So it's going to be a different kind of mis and disinformation and lying than we're used to with Trump, I think. So it's unfortunate, and he's continuing to try and make this advances this plea that if he doesn't say outrageous stuff, the media doesn't pay attention to stuff, and that's wrong.
You know, the first thing that the Republicans went after Walls on after he was picked by Kamala Harris was his embellishing or making factual misstatements about his military record, even though he has a lot to be proud of. He served in the National Guard for, I think it was 24 years. We had Seth Moulton on yesterday, the congressman who's done 4 tours of duty in Iraq, so he's a pretty good source. And he, too, is concerned about that and how Walls handles that without being terribly defensive, but also not being dismissive, because I think it's a legitimate question. He did hopefully only misspeak, but he's got to confront that stuff. I hope he does, and he appears to be these are 2 pretty competent guys, I should say. Vance has not been competent as a candidate, but he is a smart guy, so it may be an interesting debate. Ellen and Hingham, you are next on Boston Public Radio at 877-301-8970. Hi, Ellen. Or not. Okay. Let's try one more.
Hello?
Oh, Ellen, there you are. It's our fault, not yours. Hi, Ellen. What's up?
I might be in a bad spot.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It was my mistake. Go ahead.
I would just like them to just call out the lies. And it's from top to bottom. It is not just Trump out there lying. It's the entire party, top to bottom, who is taking credit for the things they voted against, just lie without abandon. Like, it's insane and it's infuriating that it's not done in real time.
I am 100% with you. I thought the ABC people did it really skillfully, and I'm with you. Ellen, thank you for the call. You know, it's a good example. We're going to talk to John King later in the day. 2 Senate races that no one thought could possibly be in play. 2 Republican incumbents. Ted Cruz in Texas is allegedly leading by 1 point. Rick Scott in Florida by 1 point. Getting back to what the caller just said about them taking credit for things they didn't do, we did this at the time. The day after Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, voted against the IVF bill in the Senate, he released a television commercial, I think with his grandkids in it, talking about how he will draw a line and will always support IVF for people who choose to form their families that way.
Yeah.
How can you, I don't even know how, unless you're Trump, how you can even say or do those kinds of things.
Well, there's also the candidate who doesn't, a male candidate who doesn't have a family, and he sent out a mailer with his best friend's wife.
Oh, tell this story. This is the best. I can't remember who it is either.
But he's a Republican, and he is running for office, and he doesn't have a wife, which is fine, totally fine. Doesn't have any kids, also totally fine. And he sent out a mailer of him posing with his best friend's wife and his best friend's 2 kids with no explanation on it whatsoever, so that, you know, he can shield himself from this attack on childless people and make himself look like he has a pretend ready-to-go family.
Did you mention, by the way, because I was just reading a text, my apologies, at the end of what you're saying, you mentioned in addition to standing out in the street with a woman and 3 kids, he also has them at the dinner table in his house, and his explanation is something, these are just neighbors, these are the kinds of people I communicate. I have everybody over for dinner. Here it is. His name is Derek Anderson. And it's, by the way, it's a very fine-looking family. It's not his, but they are a very fine. Marian Mansfield, I think, nails it. She says, dunk tank fact-checking. That's what I'm wishing for. How great would that be? Every time they lie, they just get dropped into one of those those tank things. Would that be fabulous?
I'm all for it. I mean, I've never offered to, nor have I been asked to moderate a debate. I've often been on the planning committees of debates. They give me a lot of anxiety because I would yell back at people, which I think is very hard for me. Like if I were moderating a debate and someone said a blatant lie or even a not enough context in something, I would be compelled to correct them, and that's.
Well, see, I think if you do it in a way that is not totally intrusive. First of all, my attitude is when a candidate, and Marjorie and I have done probably 100 debates or lots of debates together. But your first, I think, as a moderator, if you believe in fact-checking, which I believe you have an obligation to do, with all due respect to Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, who I think are great. I just don't agree with their CNN's decision in that first debate. You always have to let the opposing candidate have an opportunity to respond. And if he or she doesn't do the job, I think you owe it to the viewer to at least make some correction and allow the person who you're calling out to, by the way, locally, this happens too. For example, in the Warren race, the first debate is John Keller this year.
Yep.
John Keller never does fact-checking. He just goes to the other person, which, again, that's his decision. He's terrific at it. Adam Riley and Saray Wintersmith are going to do it for GBH and New England Public Media a couple of days later. We'll see what approach they take to the Warren-Deaton thing. But don't you think you have an obligation to the viewer to at least give them a hint that something that was said was patently false?
Yeah, and I think we also have to acknowledge, though, that over the past 10 years, the fact-checking has become more important because the candidates, especially one type of candidate, have been lying more blatantly.
Another great point.
It's not even just this is my interpretation of what happened, or I say I'm going to do this, but I don't have the power to really get it done, or, this is what I'm hoping that can get done, or my recollection of how I serve something that doesn't match the record. Those might be normal storytelling or factually, directionally correct statements, but Trump is now just blatantly lying, and that's changed how everybody is doing everything. But we want to hear from you and what you want to talk about regarding the debate tonight, the vice presidential debate. So stick around with us. We want your calls and texts. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH. We're live from the BPL and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
This week, Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance are facing off in their first debate, with the presidential election only a month away and the race still at a razor-thin margin. We'll hear about key issues like immigration, the economy, and reproductive rights as the VP nominees attempt to sway undecided voters. Tune in for the CBS Vice Presidential Debate tonight at 9 on CBS or simulcast by NPR here on GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Comcast, offering Xfinity Internet, designed to provide a connection for home networks so everyone can be online at once, even during peak hours. More information at xfinity.com. And The Trustees, presenting Halloween on the Hill, a celebration of autumn at the Trustees Long Hill in Beverly, running Wednesday through Saturday nights until October 27th. Advance tickets required. Learn more at thetrustees.org/Halloween.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Sue O'Connell sitting in for Marjorie. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Our text prompt of the day, and we read some of your texts right before 1 o'clock. Former President Carter turns 100 today. We're celebrating his life and work in office and after. We want to have you share your fondest memories or any memories at 877-301-8970. But currently we're talking about the vice presidential debate at 9 o'clock tonight. Far too late for many of us, but I guess important on the West Coast. Vance and Walz. What are you watching for if you're watching at all? Most of the feedback we've gotten so far is about the lack of out loud fact checking. There'll be a QR code on the screen only if you're watching on CBS, by the way, not on any of the simulcasts on other stations, and you hit the Q card, whatever. So Jess from New Hampshire says, I think Judge Judy should moderate. She puts up with no nonsense.
That's a good point.
Thank you. I love that. Hello. I said that. Thank you. And an anonymous texter, where they get slimed when they lie, like on the 80s Nickelodeon
That'd be great.
kids show. That is
Someone
totally
else is
true.
also suggesting paintball shots. That would also be very good. I like it a lot.
877-301-8970 is the number. We were thinking this morning, as I'm sure I hope some of you have, has there ever been a major moment in a vice presidential debate that has been remembered? The only one we could really come up with is the most famous moment. Dan Quayle is running for vice president. Lloyd Bentsen is George H.W. Bush's choice. He was a senator from Indiana at the time. And the Democrat, otherwise known as Michael Dukakis, picked Lloyd Bentsen. Here's a quiz for you. Who broke the story that Lloyd Bentsen he's a senator from Texas, was the vice presidential nominee for Michael Dukakis?
You did?
Nope.
I don't know.
He was an Associated Press reporter at the time, very young. You've probably heard of him.
I don't know.
John King.
Oh, John King.
Young John King broke the story that Lloyd Bentsen was the nominee. Here is the moment. Quayle was quite young and not terribly swift, but he kept talking about how he essentially was John Kennedy. John Kennedy hadn't been that experienced when he was elected to national office. Here is Quayle, and then Bentsen's killer response, which he obviously prepared but delivered beautifully.
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Can I tell you something? I was no fan of Quayle. It's 36 years later. I still have like a physical reaction.
Well, the murmur. Do you hear the murmur when he says it? Like, you know it's coming. Like, it's just, you just served it up and he's coming for you. So
he really was
something.
Coming.
All right. Let's go to John in Westford calling us. Hey, John.
Hello, John.
Hi. I hope there's no fact checking at all.
Why is that?
I think it, well, because I'm conservative.
I know. That's fine.
Don't remember. And it just seemed like it was very one-sided and biased. And there were plenty of things that they should have called out on her that they didn't.
Like what?
Proven factually wrong.
Like what?
Well, when she said, he said there's Charlottesville. There were decent people on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
If you look that up, even Snopes came out and said, no, it never happened. The next sentence.
He did say it, but there was context. So, John, let me ask you a couple of questions.
It wasn't context. The next sentence, the very next sentence was, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis. They should be condemned.
By the way, that is true. That happens to be true. And Donald Trump was there, and didn't he say it, that it's always been taken out of context? If I recall from the debate, I could be wrong, but I think he did the fact check. And by the way, my attitude, John, as I said before, when we've done debates, Marjorie and I, or I've done them, is the first job of fact checking should fall on the opponent, not on the moderator. But I frankly, respectfully, John, think, as we said before, more fact-checking at Trump because he did more misrepresentation of the facts.
I mean, if you use a mathematical equation and you just look at the blatant lies, not contextual things or things that are slightly misstated, Trump lied at least 31 times in that debate, and Kamala Harris lied 3 times. So if he was fact-checked, I think 3 times, mathematically, he still had a long way to go before Kamala Harris should be fact-checked once.
But, John, let me just be clear, though. I know you think there was bias, and I disagree, but I respect your opinion. If you believe that the reporters could rise against what you see as bias, don't you think fact-checking is important for the audience?
No, only because if it's a subjective thing, like a lot of Trump's fact-checking was on more or less subjective. You know how he's always saying, oh, really good, he did good, very good. Like, he doesn't speak very well, I'll admit it. But, so, it's different than, like, Kamala, I mean...
Kamala's her name,
you can say it, John.
Kamala.
Say it with me, Kamala.
Go ahead.
You can say it.
Go ahead.
Kamala. There were actually factual things there that, if you go to a conservative site...
You think it was unfair. We got it. And by the way, you're not alone. I don't agree with you, but a lot of people
John,
do.
if J.D. Vance says tonight that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, are taking pets and eating them, should he be fact-checked on that?
That's a tough one. I think that's up to Walls to call him out on it. Mm-hmm. There was the Attorney General did come out and say...
Oh, don't, John. You were doing great until you started with that. The governor of the state, who is a rock-rib Republican, Mike DeWine, says this is total BS and unnecessary and cruel.
The cat was in the basement.
Thank you for the call. Luca in Auburn, this is a very good point. The most famous VP debate moment was not the one that we mentioned. It was Mike Pence and the fly. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Because he has bright white hair,
And
there was a black fly right on his head the whole time.
You know, a fly always steals the show. Whenever there's a fly on stage, you notice that? I would have loved it if Kamala Harris had just reached over and said, excuse me, Vice President Pence, you have a fly on your head.
Don't you think she was thinking what the appropriate thing was?
Yeah. You gotta bet, you know.
I would hope, again, I don't know, I would hope that Walz carries a fly swatter with him tonight, just because you never know what's going to arise. Jane in Grafton, you're on Boston Public Radio with Sue O'Connell and me, Jim Browdy. Hi.
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 I've really thought about what Walz should say when Vance disparages him on his service.
Yeah.
And I think he shouldn't be defensive. I think he should say he's very proud of his 20 years of service. I think he should make sure he tells them that they wanted him to leave several years before because of his hearing impairment, but that he got an exception to stay in, and that he's proud of his service, that everyone should be proud just like Vance should be proud. And then I think he should say, and I would never disparage anyone for their service, including, for instance, I would never try to disparage you because you only served 4 years when I served 20. I would never disparage you because you were a photographer and I was teaching people how to shoot guns, because every service is value and we should value
Jane, I hear you. The one thing I'd add to that, he did misrepresent being in war, and as someone much more credible in this issue than I, again, because he did 4 tours of duty in Iraq, Congressman Moulton said yesterday, that was a mistake. He apologized for it. Most of America knows nothing about it. If it's broached tonight, I think he's got to say, I made a mistake. Shouldn't have done it. It's been corrected. Admit, if you do something wrong, admit it. And I think most people in this country are pretty forgiving. Jane, thank you very much.
You know, but to that point.
Do you agree with that or no?
I do, but here's the problem, right? You know, so he's saying that he served 25 years and he served 24 years. He actually served, right? He actually was part of the operation, what was called for Enduring Freedom, even though he wasn't in the Middle East.
Yeah, but that's nitpicking. He was in Italy when he was carrying.
But these are the things that, and he did shoot people. He did use a weapon of war. He was not in this active combat. So yeah, okay.
So admit it. Just say it.
But then we look at the other side, and it's like this mountain. It's just not equitable. That you're calling out people for, again, these directionally correct statements which don't distort what actually happened. I mean, it might be an embellishment, it might be a misstatement, but it doesn't change the facts that he served for 24 years. He carried a weapon of war when he was teaching people how to shoot, and he was part of Operation Enduring Freedom, right? And then we look at J.D. Vance, who's going to pretend he didn't say any of the things that he said about Trump.
The false equivalency thing, I agree. But I have to say, I find it very appealing when people who have served this country, either militarily or otherwise, show respect for people who've done the same thing, particularly when there are those of us who have not. And I think that's the best way to treat it. Your point about false equivalency, which obviously was way out of control in the Clinton-Trump thing in 2016, and the media was part of that abomination, I totally agree with. And that's why I think people like John from Westford, who calls us regularly, he's a really thoughtful guy who pays attention to politics. If you're watching, I understand how people think there's bias. I didn't see it as bias. I thought, as you said, it was a reflection of the fact that Trump almost cannot get a sentence out of his mouth without some gross misrepresentation.
It's like you have a sibling who is always getting in trouble, and your sibling finally gets through one meal without making a problem, and he gets the dessert, and you drop your spoon, and your parents go crazy on you. That's what it means to me. That's how I really.
Beautifully put.
I'm basically an only child, but I've heard that that's how it goes. But
you're not an only child.
Well, both my brother and I are only children because he's 15 years older than I am.
Oh.
It took us a long time to notice that because we're both only children.
I understand that.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody for your calls and texts. We look forward to you watching the debate tonight.
By the way, we'll have it on radio if you're in your car or you're not in front of a TV.
Trenni Casey of NBC Sports Boston is up next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Mexico is inaugurating a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, the first woman to hold the country's highest office.
Vamos a seguir gobernando con el principio de por el bien de todos.
She says we will continue governing with the principle that for the well-being of all, we put the poor first. What Sheinbaum's presidency could mean for Mexico, next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you and the Boston Speakers Series, 7 evenings at Symphony Hall, featuring Supreme Court correspondent Nina Totenberg, historian Annette Gordon-Reed, and composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. Information at bostonspeakers.org. And Innuendo Natick, featuring the Hunter Douglas Season of Style event with PowerView automated window treatments. Hunter Douglas PowerView automation, measured and installed by their team at Innuendo and innuendo.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Sue O'Connell sitting in for Marjorie. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Joined now by Trenni Casey. Trenni's an anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston and a BPR contributor. Hi there, Trenni.
Hi, guys.
Hey
Good day,
there.
Trenni. How are you? Good to see you early.
I know.
I know. It's exciting.
Oh, you sort of work in the same place.
Not sort of.
We do.
We work
very
together.
exciting.
Sue often swings by my desk to chat all things politics.
that.
It's very exciting.
Great, yes.
All right, let's talk all things football. Tom Brady is, suddenly talking a lot and saying a lot of things. He responded. Baker Mayfield of the Buccaneers, quarterback, made a statement about how the stressed-out environment in the Tampa Bay locker room when Brady was there was created by Brady. Let's take a listen to what Tom Brady had to say.
I thought stressful was not having Super Bowl rings. So there was a mindset of a champion that I took to work every day. This wasn't daycare. If I wanted to have fun, I was going to go to Disneyland with my kids.
I've never heard him do anything like that, ever.
No, and usually, wasn't he complaining about how stressed out he was in Belichick's locker room?
Yes, he was.
What's your reaction?
My reaction to this is that there's an age difference. Tom Brady is 47 years old, and he carried into the... And I think this is partially why... towards the end, even in New England, it got frustrating for him. And even in his second year in Tampa, remember, he went in 2020, the COVID year, and won a Super Bowl with Tampa. And that's not to diminish what he did. What he accomplished is incredible, 7 Super Bowls. But he went in kind of this weird environment, went in with this new group. Boom, they win a Super Bowl. And then things started, I think, to probably go downhill from there. And then he retired. I think, obviously partially because he was going through a divorce and familial issues. But I also think that after a while, when you're 20 years older than everyone in the locker room, the way that you were brought up and raised is different than the way kids now are brought up and raised. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I cannot watch these reality shows with girls in their 20s and guys in their 20s. I feel like an old person. I find them to be self-absorbed and not hardworking, and everybody wants the fast path to success.
Get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. And I think Tom Brady's way of doing things is the way Bill Belichick did it, but just maybe slightly softer, but which is still too hard for a lot of these kids who grew up in a different environment.
By the way, I totally buy your thing, but that was not at all what I heard when I heard him say that, even though I agree with you. What I heard is a guy who has never spoken his mind about anything.
That is
when he
true.
was
Yes.
playing the game
Fair.
for a couple of decades, in his first 3 deadly dull performances as a commentator, he got pissed off, and he basically said exactly what. And if he wants to be successful in his new job, this is exactly the kind of thing he's got to do.
I think in this situation, he felt comfortable because he had to defend himself.
I agree.
Right? I don't know that sort of candid nature is going to spill over to how he's going to talk about other guys. Because I do think Brady, and I think we saw this in the roast, while he laughed at some things, there were things that made him very uncomfortable and hold things, I think, now even more, a little closer to the vest. I think some of us thought the roast might relax him and be like, oh, see, I can be cool. I can be like everybody else. I think he hated the experience. I think it was wildly wildly uncomfortable for him, and he doesn't want stuff like this. So he clapped back, as the kids would say, he clapped back at this because he feels attacked, like any of us would. He was defensive for himself, not for other people.
He's also got a new job that he's trying to learn how to do for the first time at this. I mean, this is why I don't golf, because I don't want to have to fail learning how to golf at 62 years old. And he's trying to learn a new job, which is hard. We all know how hard it is. And he's getting like hammered for it. So I imagine he's like trying to take a shot where he can.
And I'm sure there is, like, he's probably taken so much criticism that he can't respond to because, like, what is he going to say when everyone says he stinks on TV? But this is something that he can at least stand up for himself. And he does. Like, he's not a great analyst. And
but this was great.
But this was great. This was like more of this Tom Brady.
Okay, let's talk about
another. It also was natural. Like, if you listen, if you listen,
I totally agree.
If you actually even listen to his voice, like the octave level of his voice there is natural and authentic and different compared to when he's got this weird, like, TV analyst
more
voice
of that,
for
Tom.
everything
More
else.
of that,
More
Tom.
of that, Tom
Let's
Brady.
talk. Let's hear from another guy who used to have a connection to the Patriots, sort of most of the same time as Brady did. This is Bill Belichick, who now does media analysis because he didn't get a coaching job. Here is his early season Patriots diagnosis. Yesterday, on the Pat McAfee show. Here it is.
I'd say there's a number of issues. One is can't move the ball and can't score. Got a touchdown off the fumbled kickoff, but otherwise had a hard time moving the ball. I think there are some pass rush issues there. There are some, scoring issues, and Joey Sly is a great. That's a great addition for him. They got a good kicker. That's a big upgrade. I'd say there's some other things that have to be worked out, and we'll see. We'll see what the plan is. I have no idea what it is.
Talk about goal. After praising Brady, this is a guy who led the team to absolute ruin.
Absolutely.
And he has the nerve to say about a successor, we'll see what the plan is. I have no idea what it is.
So what I think what he's saying there is that I'm not privy to it, right? Like, I think that's his way of saying, I haven't talked to Gerard. I don't know what their long-term plan is. But, man, could he be enjoying this downfall anymore?
Well, wait a second. One is you can't move the ball and can't score. Sort of like when I was the coach of the team. Exactly.
Yes,
how about a little self-reflection?
Oh, Bill Belichick to have self-reflection? Come on.
So what's the word? When you guys talk over there when you're not Sue is not bothering you at your desk or whatever she's doing, when all you sports heads talk, is the conventional wisdom that sometime during the season he's going to go to my home team, the Eagles, or one of these teams that should be great that's not?
So there's differing schools of thought. Some people feel like he would not want to go mid-season because he would probably have to absorb some of the staff that's already there. Like, you can't come in and clean house in the middle of the year. You'd have to maybe deal with some people who are still there. Like if they, fired Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia or Mike McCarthy in Dallas, two teams that are struggling. But some people feel like he would jump at and the reason some people think he wouldn't want to do that is because he wouldn't be able to put his plan fully into place, right? So if they fail, then it might keep him from getting renewed the next year and getting the interim tag removed and having a chance at being a head coach again. But some people feel like the minute he gets a chance to be a head coach, he'll take it again because he feels like he could go in and be the savior. I think he thinks he could be the savior regardless. So I think if, he was seen, and listen, this is not unusual for broadcasters to be sports broadcasters to be on a sideline talking to somebody high up in the organization that and he was seen at the Eagles Monday night game a couple weeks ago on the sideline talking with Jeffrey Lurie, who's a Massachusetts native. They have, they already have a relationship in place.
And he's the owner, right?
And he's the owner of the Eagles. Yeah, I should say that. He's the owner of the Eagles. To me, that's not like, oh my God, he's trying to poach him from the Pat McAfee show. But he does have a decent relationship with the Eagles, and he has a pretty good relationship with Jerry Jones. The Eagles wouldn't probably stick it as much to the Kraft family if he went to work for Jerry Jones in Dallas. Like, if he wants to be vindictive in any way, shape, or form, oh boy, going to the Dallas Cowboys would be a way to stick it to the Kraft.
And part of the vindictiveness is Jerry Jones, the obnoxious owner, and worse, of the Dallas Cowboys, is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And all that Robert Kraft wants is to be in the Hall of Fame, and is not there.
Hall of Fame. Yes.
Yeah, so.
The one other thing that might keep Belichick from going mid-season is the Crafts are still paying him. And I don't know if this is the last year of his contract, but he was making rumors of upwards of $25 million a year. And the Crafts, because they fired him, the Crafts have to pay that out. And if he gets a new head coaching job, they don't. But he's making all this extra money as a broadcaster, but that does not count because he does not have a job in football. So the Crafts have to pay him $25 million, and he gets all this money from. He's working for like 15 places. Like he's at like Underdog Sports and ESPN.
But let me. What I had heard was
NFL Weekly
in terms
Today
of his
or
income,
it's called.
there are only 3 houses left on Nantucket that he doesn't own, and once he buys those 3 houses, then he doesn't have to worry about his salary. Is that what you hear too? I'm only kidding. Okay, we're talking to.
For a second, I was like,
if someone wants to give me $5 million, I will go away forever. I swear to God. I'll start a GoFundMe. You could just get $5 million, and you'll never hear from me again.
Remember when Megyn Kelly got paid $20 million to leave?
I'm trying to get that deal.
I would
have. By Fox News?
I'm like, I would leave
from
for
NBC.
$19.5
Oh, NBC when she had that morning show. Is that what it was?
They paid her $20 million to go away. I was like, I would have gone away for 10.
You never heard of me again.
Yeah.
Okay, so
again.
2 sports icons, one only on the field, one on the field and after he was on the court. Mutombo, obviously one of the great defenders in the history of the NBA and his humanitarian work, particularly in Africa after. And Pete Rose, arguably the greatest hitter that ever played, and then all of a sudden had a gambling problem that kept him barred from the Hall of Fame for life. For people who don't, give a quick summary of who Rose was on the field and off.
So Pete Rose, for those of you who don't know, is the all-time leading hits.
Yeah.
Right? All-time leading hits. He has the most hits in Major League Baseball. But in the 80s, 80s or 90s while he was managing, I think it was the 80s.
I don't know what decade it was.
I believe it was the late 80s when he was managing. He was nabbed for betting on baseball. And he was unceremoniously banned from baseball for life, taken off the ballot, the Hall of Fame ballot. He cannot be written in. He cannot be on the ballot. And no subsequent commissioner has allowed him to be up for the Baseball Hall of Fame. He had spent some time in jail for tax evasion. I never knew. I'm too young. I didn't really watch. I didn't watch him as a player. I don't think I was even born, or I was too little when he was still playing in baseball. And I only vaguely remember, I think he got banned from baseball in 1985 or 1986. I was just a little kid. I don't really remember it. But I know that it's a pretty split camp. Now, especially now that gambling is legal in the United States and Major League Baseball has partnered. If you watch MLB Network, they do lines and prop bets and all of these things. And obviously, it's still illegal for Major League Baseball players to bet on baseball, but it's this ingrained part of sports now. And so some people argue that while Pete Rose was a gambling addict, he, Dan Shaughnessy wrote a great column today, and said he loved gambling more than he loved baseball. But some people wonder, similar to sort of like the Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire steroid thing, Roger Clemens, like at what point do you sort of forgive previous sins and allow them in for what?
Well, you know what's a similarity actually with some. Mark McGwire has admitted he used steroids. Am I not right?
Yes.
Part of the problem with Rose is twofold. One, he didn't just bet on baseball; he bet on his own team when he was managing the Cincinnati Reds, which is really bad. And secondly, for about 20, Shaughnessy mentioned this, he lied for years and years, and then he wrote a book and he finally admitted that he did it. So I think my sense is, had he admitted, I made a huge mistake, I can't believe I did this, my assumption is it would have been a different kind of scenario. But the reality is he was barred from the Hall of Fame, and most people agree the greatest hitter who ever played baseball.
And I thought the anecdote,
switch hitter, which was really exciting to watch when he would do it.
The anecdote in Shaughnessy's column that caught my eye too is Shaughnessy said that he went to interview him at some point, and Pete Rose knew everyone in the media. And Shaughnessy figured out it's because he was betting so much that he was following all of these different papers and these teams to read what was happening. That's why he knew everybody. He was always very friendly with the media, but there was sort of a sinister side to it that he was just consuming so much information that he knew who everybody was.
He was a great interview, too. There's a great Oprah Winfrey appearance that he
there is?
had.
I didn't know that.
Everybody says,
the funny things that he would say. He was razor sharp and just very entertaining. And that's sort of the part of his big personality, which you look at it like explosive on the field, amazing to play and watch and read about, and just, to your point, Jim, unable to take accountability.
And it sounds like he had somewhat of an addictive personality. Like there's another anecdote in this story. So way back in the day, not way back in the day, like when I covered baseball in the early 2000s, guys still took what we call, it's basically speed. And they would take greenies.
Yeah.
They would literally have like a fishbowl of greenies in the clubhouse. And if you had to have if you played until 10 o'clock the night before and then you had an afternoon game the next day, guys would pop greenies. And he used to make fun of people for not taking enough greenies. He's like, I take greenies. I think he was a bit of he liked to have his fun outside.
His line in the
ladies.
Shaughnessy column was, I take more greenies to watch Monday Night Football, which is a pretty good line.
Right.
Greenies, by the way, are now banned because obviously they're
amphetamines.
Yes, they're amphetamines.
So
like speed up your heart.
I mentioned Mutombo, who was one of the great defensive players in the history of the NBA, died at 58. I mean, Rose was 83. Mutombo had brain cancer. But in terms of people who exceeded Jimmy Carter, we're going to talk about at 12:55 today. Talk about somebody whose life post the NBA, where he was great, was so much greater. It was just, he dedicated his life, essentially.
Dedicated his life to be a
to
humanitarian.
Congo, where he came from, and Africa in general, from health issues to democracy issues. He was unbelievable.
Yeah, he was an outspoken advocate for human rights, the rights for black individuals, immigrants, stopping violence and war in the Congo where he was from. He was one of the NBA players who put his face on COVID vaccine PSAs.
I didn't know that. Oh, good for him.
Encouraging people to get the vaccine following the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. I never met him. He was, a bigger star in the 80s and early 90s. So I remember the finger wag and the tongue.
After he'd block
he would
you.
block a shot and he would, shake his finger at you. Just a truly, both metaphorically and literally larger than life character. I mean, he's, a gigantic guy. And not to say that a death at 83 isn't sad. I mean, 83 now to me doesn't seem that old
But he
anymore.
lived a full life.
But he lived a full life. And for someone to die, 58 years old, becoming Mutombo is young.
Definitely
and it's just really sad.
Okay, so you ran the Boston Marathon. Is that correct?
5 times, yes.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry. So I love the marathon. We were lucky enough to be right by the finish line, which, some days causes great sadness for obvious reasons. Yes. Other times, sort of exultation. So somewhere, I get the numbers a little wrong. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 people met the qualifying times. Yeah. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 24,000 are going to get to run. And even though the additional 11 or 12,000 did make the qualifying time, they're not going to run. And this is not to criticize the people who run it, but that's horrible, isn't it?
It is.
What happened exactly?
Okay, so this is what's happening with the Boston Marathon. More people are running, and there are more resources out there for people to get faster. To put it into context, my first Boston Marathon, I qualified in 2008. The year that I qualified, I forgot to sign up. It was in the back of my mind to do it, but I was covering baseball, and we were in the middle of the playoffs, and I remember where I was sitting in a press box in Philadelphia. The Brewers were playing the Phillies in the wild card round. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I can still get in. And I got in, no problem. And the qualifying time for an 18 to 34-year-old woman was 3 hours, 40 minutes, and 59 seconds. So you had the entire minute. And then 2 years later, they lobbed off the 49 seconds. And then every time Trenni moved up in an age group, they dropped the age because more and more people, now, to put in the context, I have a running coach that I use. I have a nutritionist that I use. I have a strength program there's all these things that we do. There's these different kinds of shoes that give you a little bit of an edge. So the numbers have dropped. So 18 to 34, when it first, for a long time, was 340 for a woman. Then it went to 335. Then it went to 330. They have now dropped it to 325, which means a man of the same age, it's always a 30-minute difference, a man of the same age needs to run a 2:55 marathon to get in. And the controversy comes They had to do this because so many people qualified and there are only so many slots. So they typically allow 22,000 slots to qualifiers. The remaining 8,000 go to charity runners, celebrities, bibs that they hand out. This year they actually expanded it by 2,000 extra bibs, and they still put a cutoff. You had to run 6 minutes and 51 seconds faster than your qualifying time. The problem with switching this for 2026 is that there's a lot of people who've been training for fall marathons, and you train very specifically to hit a time.
That's exactly what I said to Sue. You might even slow down. Thank you. You might even slow down at the end if you know you've met the qualifying time.
I don't know that I would. You always want to run your best.
Well, you want to qualify.
You want to get your qualifying race. But two things happen. One, a qualifying time is no longer a qualifying time. Now you're like, the minute you run across the line, you're like, okay, how much faster than my qualifying time was, and am I going to get to the cutoff? But the problem of changing the cutoff in the middle of the process is that now these people have been, maybe you thought your qualifying time was a 3:35, so you've been training for a 3:30 to a 3:35. Well, now your qualifying time is actually a 3:30. And so now you need to already be training for 5 minutes faster, and you may still need a buffer. I would like to, there are a couple changes I'd like to see them make. One, give preference to first timers. For those of us who have run, and this wasn't my idea, I've run it a lot. But like, listen, I've run it 5 times. I've been lucky enough to run it when the times were a little slower.
Wait, I'm sorry, how many times have you run?
5 times.
5 times, okay.
And so, but for people who have never done it before, give them preference. If it's your first ever BQ, let them qualify first and then let everyone else in. Or make the standards even tougher. Like, which I know, but just make it so hard that you don't need a buffer so that you know when you cross the finish line. Like, if 18 to 34 for women is 3:20, which would be a 10-minute drop from where it was, maybe then everybody who runs it gets in, and you're not doing the mental math the entire time of not knowing what you're training for and what time, because you don't really know what time you need.
You know what this is like? You know those horrible stories we read every fall in the Boston Globe where 120 kids got an acceptance letter to Harvard or to Brandeis.
And it was 100 too many.
And then they find out a week later it was a mistake, or it's horrible. You think you qualified.
Yes.
The great feeling, it's really, and again, I don't blame them, but they do have to come up with a better system.
It's hard. And and I know for people who are running are like, who cares? What's the big deal? Just get a charity bib. But like,
but that's hard too.
But as someone who wasn't a good athlete in high school, was a pom-pom girl, like not girl, pom-pom squad member.
Yeah, girl.
Marjorie was the captain of the cheerleading squad.
I was captain of my pom-pom squad.
Excuse me. Yes,
but this was something that like you can strive for, that makes you feel like it's a big deal to tell people you're a Boston qualifier. Like it's really hard. You work 5 times. You work really hard to get there.
I'm going to say this to her every day in the office.
5 times.
I'm going to walk
well,
by
now
and go
I feel
5
like
times.
I have to try and do another one. Maybe I can get to 6 to really rub it. But it's harder. Like my time for all of the years I was growing up was 3:40, and now it's 3:45 again. I'm like, can't I just get slower?
We only have 20 seconds. If you're not at the library or watching on streaming, you're wearing your Brewer sweatshirt. They're playing the Mets today at 5:32.
At 5:32 p.m.
She's going to be unbearable at the
office. Look how happy she is.
The one thing I want in life more than anything is a Brewers World Series.
Wow.
I would pay any price. If they make the World Series, I told my husband, I said, I'll put whatever it costs, I'm going, you don't have to come with me. I said, just pay it off.
They've won 5 championships?
No, they've won 0.
0, that's right.
She's
I'm
been
sorry.
5. All right.
5 times.
Great to see you, Trenni Casey. Thanks so much.
All right, Trenni Casey, anchor reporter for the NBC Sports Boston, BPR contributor, and 5-time.
More smart conversation about community issues is up ahead with Jim Brady and Marjorie Egan on Boston Public Radio. Right after a news update from NPR. Stay with us here on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and the University of New England.
WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you?
Boston. We'll get a first-person takeaway from the Boston Foundation's Lee Pelton and his reaction to the latest campus restriction.
NPR's Asma Khalid reports this comes against the backdrop of rising tensions between Iran and Israel in recent weeks.
The Biden administration says it has indications around invasion of southern Lebanon targeting the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. Asma Khalid, NPR News.
The vice presidential debate takes place tonight in New York. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio U.S. Senator J.D. Vance will each introduce themselves to voters who will be tuning in from around the country. As NPR's Tamara Keith reports, each candidate will also attempt to disqualify his opponent.
Because there isn't another debate scheduled for the presidential candidates this year, the vice presidential debate could get outsized attention. Vance has been practicing with Minnesota Congressman Tom Emmer, standing in for Walz, while Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, in a personal capacity, has been playing the role of Vance in Walz's debate prep sessions. Both campaigns are playing up their opponents' debates
early following intense rain last Friday because its parking lot flooded and the plant lost power. But relatives of some Latino workers say their loved ones did not get the message. They held up photos of the missing at a local news conference asking for more information. In a press release, Impact Plastics says at no time were employees told they would be fired if they left the building, and that message was delivered by a bilingual employee. It also called for help, and a National Guard helicopter rescued 5 workers. The company says it is devastated by the tragic loss of great employees. Jennifer Ludden, NPR News, Newport, Tennessee.
From Washington, this is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Dock workers are officially on strike at 14 ports from Maine to Texas, including the Port of Boston. Massport says Conley Container Terminal is closed until further notice. In a written statement, the agency says they're proud to have a great relationship with the longshoremen in Boston, who move more than 250,000 containers a year. Picketers outside the terminal today are holding signs protesting the use of automation, which they say will replace jobs. Bernie O'Donnell is the international vice president of the ILA.
We're going to be here as long as it takes. We're going to be here 24/7. On the picket line until we get a fair contract.
Estimates say the strike at the 14 ports could cost $4.5 billion a day. Former Harvard President Claudine Gay has been honored with an award for leadership and courage by the Harvard Black Alumni Society. The event took place on Saturday, first such event there in over a decade. After receiving the award, Gay delivered remarks to hundreds of alumni who gathered in Sanders Theater for the event, making it a rare keynote speech delivered by Gay since her resignation from Harvard in January. According to the Crimson, Gay has only made a few public appearances since she left office under a number of plagiarism allegations and criticism of her response to anti-Semitism on campus. The Black Alumni Celebration over the weekend was closed to members of the press, also featured remarks from University President Alan Garber. We're at 67 degrees in Boston right now, cloudy sky. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. This is NPR.
Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. I am Jim Browdy. Sue O'Connell, local woman, is sitting in for Marjorie Egan. We'll be back in a day or two. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Hello again, Sue O'Connell.
Good day to you. Good day, good day.
Good day.
Good day, I said.
Good day. Is that something your mother said, or where'd you pick that up?
No, it's from Willy Wonka.
Oh.
Good. I said good day.
Good day. One more reminder about our text prompt of the day. Former President Carter turns 100 today. We're celebrating his life in office and particularly after, and you can share with us your fondest or any memory at 877-301-8970. That's right before the 1 o'clock news. We're joined now at the library desk by Carol Rose, Executive Director of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Hi, Carol.
Hi, it's great to be here, Jim.
And to see you, too.
So, Carol, this story, which has been rightly dominating the news cycle and is again laying bare to some of the inadequacies I think our state has around some law enforcement issues. The sad death of Enrique Delgado Garcia, where we are still reporting that it was after an exercise, a boxing exercise, as investigation continues to go through. His funeral was last week. It shows us some challenges that the state police have in investigating themselves around something. Can you just kind of, for our listeners and viewers, let them know why there's a challenge here for the state police when it comes to investigating the death of this young man.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. This is really a sad and tragic story that raises issues about accountability and oversight of the Massachusetts State Police. So Enrique Delgado Garcia, as you said, was reportedly beaten to death at the State Police Academy on Friday, September 13th. And according to his family, his fatal injuries included things like damage to his brain, a broken neck, missing teeth.
In a boxing ring, from
in a
what
boxing,
we understand,
they're saying.
Correct?
That's
well,
what
we don't know.
They continue to say boxing exercise.
Okay.
Right. And it took them 10 days to be able to find somebody independent to investigate, because the Massachusetts State Police are embedded in the Attorney General's office and the District Attorney's offices and everywhere. So it's not clear who, if anyone, in the state can be independent enough to do an investigation when the Mass State Police are involved. And then since that time, one of his former classmates, Giovanni Giambattiste, who's a former state police trainee, has also, alongside him, told NBC Boston that he felt singled out by bullying and racist remarks, and he also spoke with WBZ and talked about alleged hazing and harassment, being things like made to color in his sweatpants or count bricks. I mean, things that have no possible training value whatsoever, and really sounds like harassment. So that's why the ACLU has called on the federal government to come in and not only to investigate the death of Mr. Delgado Garcia, but also to look to see if there is what's called a pattern and practice investigation of consistent civil rights abuses of cadets at the academy. And we really strongly believe that we need an outside independent investigation so that we can get to the bottom of whether this is a pattern in practice as opposed to just a one-off.
By the way, just to flesh out the story a little bit, the reason the original Worcester district attorney disqualified himself was because Mr. Delgado Garcia had been a victim's advocate in that office. But that doesn't change the fact that every DA, plus the Attorney General, does have state police here. Ultimately, we asked the Attorney General about this, and she indicated she was going to pick somebody, which she did as a special counsel or whatever the term is. But when I was reading the statement from your organization, I drew a conclusion, I think, that since there never can be an investigation by any law enforcement entity in Massachusetts of the state police, because by definition, there is some tension because a state police man or woman is in your office, or men or women are in your office, why not put together a permanent entity, whether it's federal, whether it's independent in some other fashion, that exists essentially when it's appropriate to do investigations of the state cops.
That's right, because that's how other states...
Oh, that's the idea?
That's how...
Oh, a permanent thing. Okay, I'm sorry.
I mean, and I just want to say the ACLU appreciates that the Attorney General appointed an independent investigator to look into the specifics of Mr. Delgado Garcia's death. And our understanding is that that David Meyer, who's the lawyer who's going to be doing this, should have all of the powers, including the ability to issue subpoenas, but we don't really know how in-depth or what the powers are going to be.
Does he have to submit to the AG before he submits to the public, or is independence?
Right, those are the kinds of questions that we don't...
This is not to question the integrity of Andrea Campbell, but still, independent should mean independent.
Should mean independent. Yeah. And beyond just the investigation of this death is now this suggestion that there's a pattern in practice that goes beyond. And that's a place where the U.S. Department of Justice could come in and do a pattern and practice investigation. And that's what the ACLU is calling for. Because we don't want to do this each time there's a death by the Mass State Police at the academy or in some other circumstances. I mean, it took days. And in the meantime, who had access to the evidence?
September 18th is when this happened. And there's been, I mean, how do you investigate something that potentially, I mean, it could have been an accident. We don't know. It could have been something
didn't John
worse.
Vanocchi write about the video? There's a video of this, which has not been released. And
that's correct.
Who makes that decision now? This Meyer guy makes the decisions?
Right. And part of it is, who's had access to the video in the meantime?
Right.
Because one of the things that the ACLU feels strongly about, whether we're talking about this kind of a video or a body-worn camera video on a police officer, is that before an investigation, the officers involved shouldn't be able to watch the video and somehow change their story to align with what the video says.
Yeah, but the flip side is the public has a right to know, I would argue.
Right. Absolutely.
So there's a tension there,
Which
too.
is why you don't want to have so many days pass between the investigation and finding out what people say, looking at the video, and then making it publicly available.
Other states where they have an entity that is
A
not
standing entity?
standing
Oh, I didn't know
law
that.
enforcement entity that investigates other law enforcement. You know, we used to have the Capitol Police at the State House who guarded the governor and other state officials. Now we have the state police that's, and again, they're doing their job. They're keeping our governor safe. But if you have the governor with the state police, and you have the attorney general who has the state police, and you have the district attorneys, and they have the state police, there's no outside entity to come in and say we're going to police the police.
Well, there is that post-commission thing, but this is a different kind of deal. You know, a related question I wanted your 2 cents on is somebody who believes that integrity and trust of police is hugely important. I'm going to read the first paragraph from a piece that Danny McDonald, Shelley Murphy, and Sean Connor wrote in the Globe on September 16th. The veteran policeman tapped to helm the scandal-plagued Massachusetts State Police. This is unrelated to the situation we're talking about. Is the subject of at least 4 discrimination complaints that allege he bypassed qualified candidates who were gay, female, and people of color for promotions while fostering a culture of cronyism during his time as leader of the New Jersey State Police, according to a Globe review. These are all pending.
Yes.
While this guy, I think he takes office, next month. I'm not sure. I should know. That's a problem, don't you think? Because, I mean, what happens when one of these he's in office and one of these is sustained? Does he get fired?
Fired at that point? And why wasn't that taken into account before he was hired?
Or was it?
Or
was
it?
Even more troubling, maybe.
This is the best we can do.
Right. I can't believe that this is the best we can do.
So what is your take? I mean, this is really odd, I should say.
I think it's really problematic. And I think when you have an entity that gets this much power, it becomes very scary for elected officials or for anyone to challenge them because they have such extraordinary breadth of power and depth of power. And so if you're going to bring in a new person at the top and they themselves have a checkered past at best, that's really problematic. And that's why the ACLU is saying we need to not only have outside investigations of this murder, outside of independent investigations of pattern and practice, but a new mechanism in place. And that's why we're looking at what other states are doing to try to get some ideas. This is a ripe opportunity for law reform. We in Massachusetts can do better, and the people of Massachusetts deserve better.
And I'll say every state trooper who I know personally is just feeling this burden of what it means to say you're a state trooper. And it's really makes it harder for them to do their jobs when this is hanging over their heads.
Well, someone's got to, I don't know if Governor Healy has spoken to whether she knew about these issues when she made the choice. I assume so. And if she did, she obviously must have considered that they weren't either reliable or sustainable. Whatever it is, I think the public is entitled to know what the hell is going on with this guy. Absolutely. So the Supreme Court convenes a week from yesterday.
Yep.
Could you list for us what rights they're going to repeal in the next
Oh my God. I don't think we have
session?
enough time, Jim. I don't think we have enough time.
Give us a taste of what are the 2 or 3, in your estimation, major matters of grand import that are going to be before the court.
Well, there are a lot of issues. So the one thing I do want to say, because we've spent a lot of time, and I've been part of that, talking about the really bad things that the Supreme Court has done. I mean, for example, last term, they expanded rights for hedge fund managers and big business. They gave immunity to a former president who, tried to undermine democracy and obstruct justice, and then denied protections to people experiencing homelessness and to black voters in South Carolina. So it's a pretty grim background that we have coming for the new Supreme Court.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Well, I do want to say, last term, the ACLU had a bunch of cases in front of the court. You know, the ACLU is in front of the Supreme Court more than any other group except the Department of Justice defending the government.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, but we had 11 cases last term where the court sided with us, and 6 that we lost. And the 6 that we lost were, I think, of more consequence. But we continue to fight, and we have to continue to fight, even if we critique the court. But I just want to say that so people don't think it's completely a lost cause. But the 2 cases that we so far know about in this term that the ACLU is actually going to be counsel for the parties involved. The first is U.S. versus Scrutiny, which has to do with access to gender-affirming care. So there are now 24 states that have said that young people, in this case it's a 16-year-old, are banned from accessing gender-affirming care, which of course is really important for them to be able to do it when they're young, because that's when it pays off more, right? And so this is our client in this case is a young woman named, I don't know what her name is, but her parents are Samantha and Brian Williams of Nashville, Tennessee. And they had to go out of state. And they were lucky they were able to afford to go out of state to get their daughter this gender-affirming care. And they say, since this, it's incredibly painful watching my child struggle before we were able to get her this life-saving health care that she needed. We now have a confident and happy daughter who is free to be herself, and she is thriving. But Tennessee's ban forced us at great expense to seek routine health care visits out of state and may at some point force us to leave Tennessee, the only home our children have ever known. So, I mean, leading medical organizations like the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all oppose these restrictions. And yet these states continue to impose this.
And these are in circumstances where medical professionals have deemed this treatment medically necessary. This is not
correct.
On a whim of an individual or a parent.
Right.
It's
And
like any other health care that a doctor or a doctor-related person says this patient needs.
Right, and that violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. That's what the ACLU's argument is going to be. And we've had similar cases like this in the past.
Are you the lawyers or is it a friend of the court?
The ACLU is the lawyers.
The lawyers?
Is the lawyers on that case. Right, so, we made a similar or successfully argued this in front of the court back in 2020 when LGBTQ clients were fired. Because of their position.
Can I tell you what worries me about this case beyond the underlying? Well, there's one piece of good news. A lot of Republicans who are parents have filed an amicus, if I hope I'm right about this, in this case, saying this is a parental right case. We don't want the state getting involved here. Parents will make a decision with the kid, and so they're attempting to intervene. But the deep concern I have, and I'll quote Amy Coney Barrett, who I rarely do. What was the decision last year where she said her conservative colleagues went far beyond where they needed, whatever it was? My fear is the Clarence Thomases, the Alitos of the world decide this is a perfect opportunity, not just to rule against gender-affirming care, but to revisit this employment case related to LGBTQ people, and even though it's not before the court, determine that was wrongly decided too.
Yep.
That's a risk here, is it not?
No, it totally is a risk. On the other hand, if we don't fight, then it's definitely a risk.
No, I understand, of course.
Right, and so I think this, and by the way, we're talking about here puberty blockers, hormone therapy. We're not talking about surgery here.
Right.
So this is a case where the parents wanted their child to get the care, right? And so this is just this for the state to come in and say you are banned from getting this care if you live in Tennessee, but not if you live in Massachusetts, is just a clear violation of equal protection under the law.
Okay, so what other horrible things are they going to do?
Another one that we have is about online free expression. So this is a challenge to a case out of Texas, where the Texas state legislature passed a law that basically said that you have to provide ID when you go onto any website that has more than 1/3 of what Texas deems to be harmful to minors. So things like R-rated movies or any website about sexual health.
But they say their goal is to keep kids off porn sites, right? I mean, that is what they say their intention
That's what they're saying their goal is. But that has the same impact of making all of us who are adults also have to give ID. In other words, it's not just the children who have to give ID, it's all of us who have to give ID. And imagine what can happen. There could be, if you have to show ID and then the government can track what websites you visit, the opportunities for the government to get involved and to censor you or to blackmail you or to do any number of things is huge. And so as a matter of free speech, the ACLU is arguing that, in fact, this law is unconstitutional and should be repealed.
So if one believes, as I do, that it's probably not a good thing for kids to be looking at porn sites, and assuming that one agrees with you, this is overly broad, is there a way to keep kids off harmful sites like that without violating the rights of adults?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things. First of all, parents can put on filters. That's up to parents. Nothing prevents a parent from putting a filter on a website. Or they can do like I did, which is to tell my children, if you go to these websites, understand that you're supporting the exploitation of other people. So I got into their heads. And so I put a permanent mom filter on my children.
Did it work, or you don't know?
I don't know, but I think they're all in very healthy adult relationships now. I think it worked pretty well. But I just don't think it's the right of the government to come in and to make all of us show our ID just when we want to access a website because there's an R-rated movie or information about, sexual health or things like that.
One other case that concerns me, you guys may not be formally involved in, this ghost gun issue. And ghost guns are these things where you can print them out on a 3D printer. They have no serial numbers, which make them totally untraceable and arguably even more dangerous. And you can see, again, Thomas et al. Hiding behind the Second Amendment here.
Right.
I mean,
as if there were ghost guns when the Constitution was passed.
That is a fine point.
Not to mention AR-15s and all this other stuff. I have no problem with people having muskets. Right,
Okay,
but to invoke originalism on this stuff, it's just this is Justice Thomas and others on the court just being purely ideological. It has nothing to do with, they hide behind originalism when it suits their ideological purposes, and they duck it when it doesn't.
Okay, so if you were advising Tim Walz tonight at the debate at 9 o'clock, that was applause from the audience for whatever Carol just said there, and you were asked, when you're talking about how horrible the Supreme Court is, which I assume will come up, and denying people's rights, like in the Dobbs case, or repealing Roe v. Wade, and the moderator says from CBS News, Ron Wyden, a senator from Oregon, former legal services attorney, by the way, has filed a bill to expand the Supreme Court and to increase the percentage of votes on the Supreme Court from a majority to 2/3 to overturn a law passed by Congress. And Tim Walz is asked what to do. It is not popular. Term limits are popular. Expansion of the court is not popular with the American people. What do you advise Tim Walz to say?
I think that Tim Walz should say that the Supreme Court is obviously ideologically driven, that we can have reforms, that the reforms, such as expanding the court, it's been done in the past, it can be done again, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says that we have to have a certain number. And in fact, I would submit, at the time that we came up with 9 Supreme Court justices, there were 9 courts of appeal. Now there are 13.
So that's a really good point.
Right, so maybe we should have the same number so that every person throughout the land has a jurisdiction, has a representative.
So you're suggesting you tell the truth, something really unusual.
Oh my gosh, that's a road too far, Jim.
That is what you seem to be saying. We're talking to Carol Rose, head of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts.
All right, Carol, let's talk about this disturbing execution of Marcellus Williams. First, just could you briefly set the situation here? It's also a rare instance where almost everyone involved in this case was against the execution. It went forward anyway. Can you just quickly set for us what happened?
So the state of Missouri executed Marcellus Williams. He was a 55-year-old black man last Tuesday by lethal injection. And the Supreme Court, in a split decision, declined to intervene at the last minute and halt it without providing any reasoning at all. And both the district attorney, the prosecutor, the victims' families, everybody was opposed to this and instead said, give him a life sentence, but don't do that, because there were so many allegations of a tainted jury pool, racially tainted jury pool, and things like that. And so this is just one of 5 people who were executed in 5 different states, like in recent days. And there's, I think, 7 more people this year who are coming up. And we have learned over the years how many innocent people are on death row because of racist policing and prosecutors and things like that, and unfairness. Over 200 people on death row have been exonerated.
200.
200 people, and that's from the Death Penalty Information Center.
Okay, so you're John Roberts, who amongst the conservatives is, I would argue, I was going to say the least extreme until we read about what he did last year in the New York Times. Forget that. You have some conservative justice who takes sodium pentothal. Is that true serum? Whatever it is, true serum. And you say, excuse me, Mr. or Ms. Justice, as Sue and you just said, the prosecutor's office who prosecuted him, the victim's widower, the husband of the woman he killed, who's a reporter, by the way, who he allegedly killed, or who he's found guilty of killing, and I think at least one juror and the defense, everybody involved in this case agrees he should not get the death penalty, should give a life sentence. Explain to me, Ms. Justice or Mr. Justice, why their judgment was trumped by yours. What would they say? What's the answer?
All I can say, Jim, is I think that, we're talking about an ideological court who apparently believes that justice is vengeance is justice, and there's a difference between vengeance and justice, and we have learned that over the years, and we're so lucky here in Massachusetts, and the ACLU, among others, has been a bulwark against having a reinstatement of the death penalty. I mean, we got rid of it back in 1984, and we actually haven't executed anybody since 1947, but we know that the death penalty is fundamentally flawed from start to finish. We know public support for the death penalty is falling. We know that no other civilized country engages in the death penalty.
That's really important to say. No other Western nation, and when we were talking about this with listeners, when Mr. Williams was executed about a week or so ago, I don't have the order exactly right. I believe it's Iran, China, Saudi Arabia, maybe Iraq, I'm not sure, and we're 5th in the world after those 4 countries.
It's not a club we want to be in.
In terms of execution numbers.
It's not a club we want to be in. And it has no impact on recidivism. It doesn't create justice. It costs more money
is
do it
incredible,
because
I know.
people have rights of appeal as they need to and should. And it's not justice. And I think we need to distinguish between vengeance and justice. And what this country wants, what the people of this country want, is justice, not vengeance.
Okay, so try not to lose those cases in front of the Supreme Court.
Okay. We're working on it, Jim.
Carol Rose, nice to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sue.
Carol Rose is the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Up next, Lee Pelton of the Boston Foundation. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH live from the BPL and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Jared Bowen. Today on The Culture Show, a honking good time. We're getting a jump on this weekend's Honk Festival of Activist Bands, a multi-day music extravaganza. The Good Trouble Brass Band joins us for a preview and a boisterous, brassy, booming performance. Plus all the news that's fit to shout. We meet the town crier of Provincetown, who's working to keep the tradition alive by way of the Provincetown Town Crier competition. That and more is next on The Culture Show, today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And the Boston Speakers Series, 7 evenings at Symphony Hall, featuring Supreme Court correspondent Nina Totenberg, historian Annette Gordon-Reed, and composer Andrew Lloyd Webber. Information at bostonspeakers.org. And Boston Medical Center, committed to delivering medical excellence that empowers all patients. Learn more about how BMC's team of experts is rewriting cancer care, sickle cell care, and beyond at bmc.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy. Sue O'Connell is sitting in for Marjorie. He'll be back later this week. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Joined now by Lee Pelton. Lee, of course, is the president and CEO of the Boston Foundation, a member of GBH's Board of Trustees, and he previously served, which is relevant to part of today's conversation, as the 12th president of Emerson College. Good to see you, Lee.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Hello,
Good to
Lee.
see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you again. So we're back to school. We're back to colleges. And, of course, the conflict in the Middle East continues to rage on. And folks still have very strong feelings, especially college students. And college students also want to be able to study. And college presidents and administration want to have a functioning college campus. And a number of colleges have put more restrictions on free speech or rules about protesting and sort of guidelines on how to behave on campus. What are your feelings about what they're doing? Is anyone doing it right in your estimation? Are they going too far? What are you thinking about this?
I've said this before, that when Bart Giamatti stepped down as president of Yale and become baseball commissioner, he said being a college president is no way for an adult to make a living. And I'm sure it feels that way to a lot of my former colleagues. I've read a lot about these strictures on free speech. And a lot of people reach back to the 60s and 70s as examples of colleges and universities being more liberal in terms of how free speech is conducted, which is true. But it was a different time, and it was a different set of issues. I mean, if you think about the Vietnam War, for instance, there was among young people, there was very little dispute on campuses about where students should stand on this issue. During the South Africa, where colleges and universities were encouraging students were encouraging their colleges and universities to divest from businesses in South Africa, which, by the way, was an effort that was almost universally, embraced by students, conflicting and emotional. So it's not one group of students arguing on behalf of, this, fill in the blank, whatever it is, but you have students with competing interests, really struggling with each other. And sometimes those struggles are ugly. They're certainly complex. some of the pro-Palestinian students are also Jewish, or also have an Israel heritage, and so on. And so I think what makes it so complicated for college and university presidents today is how complicated that issue is, not just on college and university campuses, but also in the United States.
So what are you saying? You're saying that because they're more complicated, what some places, the Harvards and others are doing to restrict, in my opinion, free speech, maybe are more understandable than they would be otherwise?
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that the comparisons to restrictions of freedom of speech, as we normally think of it, does not apply here. Because what they're restricting, or seeking to restrict, are these sort of internecine battles that are being waged on college campuses. And you have a number of Jewish students who rightfully feel that part of these efforts are sometimes anti-Semitic, and they are. And so should we permit that to occur on college and university campuses? I think that's what colleges and universities are wrestling with. So I don't see this so much as a restriction of free speech. I see this as trying to regulate and create a more civil environment for students and others who are in opposition, but to have some sorts of some sorts of regulated confrontation.
By the way, let me just say, if you're exercising in my opinion, free speech on a college campus, and I assume you'd agree with this as in your post-presidency and when you were president of Emerson, and by exercising your free speech, you're intimidating other people, you're crossing the line. But listen to this story in the Globe from Hillary Burns yesterday, actually. Yeah, yesterday. This is what Harvard is doing. You can't chalk, meaning chalk thing, post flyers without authorization. I mean, really? There's certain hours of the day you can't demonstrate. How in any way is that, and that, by the way, Emory University is doing similar things, a lot of places are. How in any way is that addressing the issue of how your free speech affects other people? It seems to me they're just trying to tighten restrictions on the exercise of free speech.
It's not. I agree with you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I agree with you. All that I'm saying is that the issues are very, very complex and difficult to manage, and that I think we ought to at least acknowledge that with respect to colleges and universities.
Would you have done any of the stuff that you've read about when you were president of Emerson?
Very little.
That's what I figured. And so Gavin Newsom, the darling of liberals in America, the governor of California, signed a law, this is not an individual university, restricting private, the Stanfords of the world, where Marjorie went, and the publics, like the UC system, in terms of what they could do, which is, to me, makes me even more nervous than individual universities doing. Is there, what's your reaction on that?
Well, there's some precedent for this. It goes back actually to 1819, and I'll tell you a little story. There was a little college in New Hampshire called Dartmouth College.
I've heard of it.
We've heard of it.
And it was having some financial issues, and the state of, and other sorts of issues, and the state of New Hampshire said, well, we're going to take it over and pull it into our state system. And on February 8th, 1819, that case went before the Supreme Court, and the lawyer who spoke on behalf of Dartmouth College was Daniel Webster.
Oh my God!
Heard of him too.
Yeah, and he famously said, speaking of his, and he was in alma mater, it was Dartmouth. 'Tis a small college, but there are those who love it. And won the day, which set up this demarcation between public universities and colleges and private universities and colleges, because it allowed private universities and colleges to make decisions about who they hire, what they teach, how they organize their work, and so on. And so I understand the impulse, but I do think that a legal challenge to this is likely in some cases, and would likely survive. Now, on the other hand, let me say this. It is clear that legacy preferences, they provide the wealthy and mostly white wealthy parents and students with a leg up in the admissions process.
We should say you're bringing this up because the same Newsom just outlawed those too, by law in California. Yeah.
Right. So, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about that issue. So, but, on the other hand, you take a small liberal arts college in New England, probably a third of those students, where they don't offer athletic scholarships, but probably a third of the students are favored because they can throw a football, 80 yards, or you could shoot the jump shot from,
or they're fencers,
or
the
they're
secret
fencers, or whatever it
admission.
is, and so they are being given preference as well. It's not based on race, but it's based on another set of characteristics that are highly valued. Those athletes receive special dispensation, but what about those who play the piano or the harp or whatever it may be, another set of talent? So I think these preferences, legacy preferences, I hope will die out, and they are dying out in some places. Wesleyan, of course, and Johns Hopkins got rid of them many, many years ago, and Wesleyan most recently. But I think we need to look broadly at all the preferences that we give to students who are admitted.
And by the way, people started even focusing on this in the wake of the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. Why should affirmative action as an element be disqualified? But legacy, very briefly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We had the former president of Harvard here after she wrote this terrific book about her first 21 years of her life, Drew Gilpin Faust, I think it was late last year. And I assumed she was against legacy admissions. I was wrong. Here's what she had to say.
I think legacy admissions has positive dimensions. It does build community. It brings people across generations to create support for Harvard and defend Harvard.
We can hold it there. What do you say to her?
I say that may all be true, but I think there are still other ways in which you can build your class and have similar kinds of outcomes.
Talking to Lee Pelton.
From the CEO of the Boston Foundation. Lee, we are marking this year the anniversary of 50 years of the busing crisis in Boston, and every younger employee that comes to work with me in any capacity, it's one of the major lessons, stories I send them, books I send them, history that I send them. Although I didn't grow up in Boston, I grew up in Revere and impacted by many of my friends and family who, as I think the headline in the Dorchester News says, the busing crisis exploded our city. Everybody was impacted by it in one way or another. Of course, black and brown kids, certainly more specifically. You were here in Boston during that time. What are your recollections of then and your thoughts about it now?
Yeah, I arrived here in 1974. And by the way, the issue, let's go back to what the issue was. The issue was segregation. It was not busing. And so one way that Judge Garrity sought to remedy that was through busing and to move students from one neighborhood where their school was available there to another neighborhood. And so that was complex because there were a lot of, and you hear this today, there were a lot of folks in the black neighborhoods who would prefer to have stayed in their neighborhoods and would prefer, rather than busing them, to put some resources in the schools in that neighborhood. And so, one can have a debate about whether or not busing was the right remedy, but remember, this was not a issue around, this was not didn't begin with an issue of busing. It began with segregation and poor schools. And we went about it in a way that I think people today think was ineffective. So I'll tell you one story for me. This is in 1975. I was taking a friend of mine to Logan Airport. And this was in the days, and young people won't remember this, but they had something called bumpers on cars, you know? So I don't even know what they look like anymore, but I know that they existed. And so I was going through the tunnel, and that was probably the best place to break down. My car broke down, and taking this friend to the airport, because someone came along, my bumper against his fender or something like that, and pushed me out of the tunnel.
Which you could do without the airbags going off.
Exactly.
There
no
were no
airbags.
airbags.
Right. No airbags. I'm not even sure I had seat belts on. But and I came out of the tunnel and then went right down into East Boston. And this was a day of a snowstorm. And pretty fierce. And so I got out of my car, and again, young people don't know what these are, but I went to a telephone booth and made a call to AAA to let them know that I was stranded and I needed help. And then the next thing I did was walk a few blocks to what I thought was like a restaurant for breakfast, and I walked in, and they were all men, by the way, were drinking beer and eating eggs and sausages. And they gave me a look that said, "You must be out of your mind. You don't belong here." And so I left and spent most of the day in the telephone booth waiting and hoping that AAA would come get me before I was, something bad could happen to me. So I remember that.
How long were you in Boston after that, right, in that stretch? How long did you stay here right after that?
Oh, I was here from 74 to 86.
And did you have any moments where you said after that experience, maybe this is not the place I should be spending the next 12 years of my life or 10 years of my life?
Well, you have to remember, I lived in Cambridge, not Boston, so...
But still, that's a pretty haunting experience.
There were some experiences, I mean, but there were certain parts of Boston that I knew that I shouldn't be in. I wouldn't go in. I wouldn't be there at night. I wouldn't be there by myself because I thought it was unsafe. And even after, 86, I moved somewhere else, and I came back to visit a friend, and he was going to take me to the South Boston Y or something like that, and I said, no, I'm not going to go. He said, listen, the place has changed. It turned out that it had. But, my father, before I came here, said, you're going to the most racist city in in the U.S., right? I said, well, okay.
So when you tell that story and you may not say to yourself, we're looking at a guy who had that experience 50 exactly,
50.
well, 49, 50 years ago. You're head of the Boston Foundation, which I know you know, obviously, because that's what your
what your job is.
I don't know if irony is the right word. I mean, there's something in that is. So that's the kind of thing that I assume drives what you do, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly that, and some my upbringing, which is sort of sort of hand to mouth.
Yeah, I spoke with former Mayor Kim Janey, as I know you did as well, and I sort of asked her the same question. When you were 11 years old and you were on a bus, being bused from the South End to Charlestown and white people throwing rocks at you, did you look out the window and think, someday I'm going to run this city, I'm going to be the mayor? And she said no, but then later she said yes.
You know what's interesting? We don't have a lot of time for this, but I don't know if I've spoken to anybody, which doesn't mean they don't exist, regardless of which side, it's a horrible expression to use, but it's true, on busing 50 years ago, who thinks busing was the right way to solve the problem. Even if you thought, we had, and that's Ted Landsmark
Yep.
was here. Michael Curry was also bust, as was, as you said, Kim Chaney. I don't think I've spoken to anybody, white or black, who was around for that or studied afterwards, who said that Garrity settled on the right decision. You know, speaking of the Boston Foundation, you're doing, and I think you're the only philanthropic entity around here that's doing this. You have this Asian community fund that has a gala on Thursday night, and you can talk about that if you want, but much more important to me is talk about the creation of this thing and why you did that and what you've done with the money you've raised, if you don't mind.
Well, you know, we, as my predecessor used to say, that, you know, it all began here, sort of thing. And so we, in fact, a lot of organizations began and were incubated at the Boston Foundation. What was King Boston became Embrace Boston, was incubated, and then now it's on its own. But we also had these equity funds. We had 4 of them, still have 4 of them. One is a business equity fund. One is an Asian community fund. Another is a Latino community fund. And the other one's an equity fund, which focuses, equality fund, which focuses on LGBTQ interests. And the ACF, Asian Community Fund, which is headed by Danielle Kim, who is a rising superstar in this city, heads that. And these, by the way, these funds usually have an advisory board, and they have some responsibility for raising their own dollars. They get some support from us, but they sit within this philanthropic community and environment, which I think they find very supportive in many ways. And so they've was founded in 2020, and this year it will it has given out, I think, $425,000 in grants to support Asian communities. And I want to say this, and I hope we all understand this, that there is no one Asian community. They are very, very diverse, economically and every way that you can, socially, culturally, in any way that you can imagine. So there's a gala, the first gala, which will be, I think, on Wednesday of this week.
Thursday.
Will honor some prominent people. I think they have over 400 people already registered for this, and so it's a big deal. It's a big coming out party.
If you want to learn more about the fund and about the event, you go to tvf.org is the website. It's great. You know, we only have 30 seconds left, and I was going to say we're not going to see you until after the election. We're actually going to see you once before the election, so we'll get your thoughts about that right before people finalize their vote. Lee Pelton, it's very good to see you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks you, Lee. He's the president and CEO of the Boston Foundation, a member of GBH's Board of Trustees, and previously served as the 12th president of Emerson College. Up next, we're going to read your text about Jimmy Carter, former president who turns 100 today. Is he sticking around just to vote against Trump? You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
This week, Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance are facing off in their first debate, with the presidential election only a month away and the race still at a razor-thin margin. We'll hear about key issues like immigration, the economy, and reproductive rights as the VP nominees attempt to sway undecided voters. Tune in for the CBS Vice Presidential Debate tonight at 9 on CBS or simulcast by NPR here on GBH 89.7.
Support for our programs comes from you and Rockland Trust Bank, helping foster healthy relationships with money by providing education and resources to the community, one neighborhood at a time. Rockland Trust Bank, where each relationship matters. Member FDIC. And Tools of the Mind, offering a bite of tools, professional development workshops empowering pre-K and kindergarten teachers with actionable strategies to propel children's self-regulation development. More at toolsofthemind.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Brady, Sue O'Connell in for Margie. We're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. As we've been soliciting your texts all day about Jimmy Carter, happy 100th birthday today to the former president, who somehow has managed to remain deeply respected by the wide swath of the American people. He's the first American president to reach 100. His post-presidency began, this is incredible, 44 years ago in 81 after he lost re-election in 56. Since he left the White House, Carter went on to get his hands dirty building houses, Habitat for Humanity, and through the Carter Center, peace missions to Cuba and the Middle East, negotiated the release of hostages, taught Sunday school and college classes, wrote books, won Grammys, helped eradicate the parasite guinea worm, won a Nobel Peace Prize, and as I'll tell you in a minute, appeared on Boston Public Radio at age 90. Quite a productive retirement. So, Sue, what are your thoughts and what are the texters saying about Carter at 100?
Well, one of my favorite things about Jimmy Carter is what a hard-knuckled political guy he was.
Oh, yeah.
And that as beloved as he is right now, he was terrifying if you were running against him, if you could just ask Ted Kennedy that. And also his work in Iowa when he was running in the primary, he pretty much set up how you win a primary when he ran for president. So I love that about him. I also love that he saved a Canadian nuclear reactor from meltdown, which no one ever talks about this. He actually risked his life when he was on a nuclear sub, climbing into an area that was about to blow up and saved everybody. We don't even talk about this because he's so busy saving the rest of the world. But one of our texters, Ralph from Arlington, he said, remembers Jimmy Carter as a nuclear officer on the submarine. He put solar panels on the White House roof, and then actor Reagan took him down when he got in there. And then Jimmy texts, I was named after Jimmy Carter. My birth name was Indian Persian in origin, but my parents were convinced that it would be too difficult for others to say. My mother loved Jimmy Carter's humanitarian efforts, and it was settled. So that's a good one. Martha in Acton, dear President Carter, you were right about sweaters. Thank you so much.
I think that was Mr. Rogers who was right about sweaters.
He wore a lot of sweaters, though. There's true about that.
By the way, just as an aside before you continue, breaking news on CNN is Iran launches missile attack in Israel. And not only is that a horrifying thing, but also there was the Iranian hostage thing that probably cost Jimmy Carter re-election.
Right, and as we later learned, he was so busy working to get them free, and at the inauguration was most concerned about of Reagan's inauguration was most concerned about that than actually sort of winning. I think.
Can I do a mea culpa here?
Please do.
In 2014, when he was 90. Jimmy Carter's press person reached out to our show. Chelsea was then running the show, and said he's written a book, the title of which was A Call to Action: Women, Religion, Violence, and Power. Do you want him on? Marjorie was enthusiastic. I said to Chelsea, the guy's 90 years old. I have respect for him. But, is he really able to do this kind of thing? So to make a long story short, he not only came on the show, but I would argue it was the most dramatic, beautiful recitation of how women are mistreated, often violently, not just in this world, but in this country. He was brilliant, but in this conversation, Marjorie, as always, was asking the important questions. Here's Marjorie, and then President Carter.
You are 90 years old. You sound fantastic. I've seen you on television. You look fantastic. So what's the secret?
Well, I married the right woman. That's one of the major things. And so that's one of the reasons I get along so well. But I've been lucky, as a matter of fact, with my health.
Are you doing the elliptical in the morning, or what? What are you doing?
Well, I get up early. I write a lot. I've been writing on my next book this morning, and that's the way I make a living, is on my book.
And by the way, speaking of staying alive, one of the most beautiful stories, which I'm sure you've all heard, it's either his son or his grandson is saying what the reason to live and stay alive that has driven my grandfather or father is what? What is the motivation?
To vote for Kamala Harris in November. So hopefully they have early voting, so at least the pressure's off. Anonymous texter reminding us that the sweater reference was to put a sweater on and turn the heat down in the house, which we followed at my house. It's also important to note Terry Gross from Fresh Air on NPR did some incredible interviews with Jimmy Carter also. And he talked a lot about how guilty he felt about how he treated Rosalind when they first got married and the traditional viewpoints and how he evolved and changed, which is also a great thing. And my favorite thing, too, is that the Onion.com, which I love, the satirical website, these are jokes that they do. I appreciate them very much. When Mr. Carter, President Carter, went into hospice, how many years ago? Two years ago, they started expecting that he would live a long time because it was several weeks that we had prepared the obituaries. So they have these headlines. This one from March 2023, Jimmy Carter enrolls in 2-year program to become dental hygienist.
It's not funny.
From
It is
April
funny,
2023, Jimmy Carter gets vasectomy reversed.
Remember he had Lust in His Heart in
Lust in
Playboy
His Heart,
magazine?
yep.
Yeah.
2024, Jimmy Carter is setting the new. That isn't actually. That's actually true. He is setting the record for American presidents, and that's important for.
Night with certified Bob Ross instructor Nicholas Hankins. Sign up by October 7th, and we'll send you a kit before the paint night on October 29th. Reserve your spot now at gbh.org/events.
Support for GBH comes from you and Babson College. You can learn to lead with impact and become a driving force for change. Babson's graduate virtual open house is on October 9th. Registration at babson.edu/gradopenhouse. And Plymouth Patuxent Museums. More than 400 years later, Thanksgiving is still the most talked about meal in American history. Visitors can experience the holiday this fall. Details at plimoth.org.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
I'm Jim Brady, head on Hour 3 of Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library. We're just 5 weeks away from Election Day in the race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Of all pumpkin spice, corn mazes, cider donuts and flannel, the crisp leaves, the crisp air. What are your New England fall rites of passage, traditions? You know, carving pumpkins, picking apples, or are you like
Receptions of the rockets or explosions? The attack comes as Israel has launched a ground offensive in South Lebanon against the Iran-backed Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Israeli police say 2 gunmen killed at least 4 civilians in the Jaffa district of Tel Aviv. Daniel Estrin, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
The White House says President Biden convened a meeting this morning with Vice President Harris and their national security team to review how the U.S. would help Israel in the event of a ballistic missile strike from Iran. The briefing also went over plans to protect U.S. personnel in the region. Unionized dock workers in Houston and other ports from Texas to Maine are on strike. Picket lines formed just after midnight when the contract between the dock workers union and the ocean carriers and port operators expired. Here's NPR's Andrea Hsu.
In normal times, the 14 ports where workers are now on strike handle well over 1 million shipping containers a month, carrying all sorts of goods coming in and headed out of the country. Auto components, paper, pharmaceuticals, wine, and spirits. While analysts say a strike lasting a couple days.
Claudia Shanebaum. Here's NPR's Carrie Kahn.
Shanebaum is a 62-year-old environmental scientist who left academia for a political trajectory that took her from a local mayor to running Mexico City to winning the presidency with nearly
with the longshoremen in Boston who move more than 250,000 containers per year. Picketers outside the terminal today are holding signs protesting the use of automation, which they say will replace jobs. Bernie O'Donnell is the international vice president of the ILA.
We're going to be here as long as it takes. We're going to be here 24/7 on the picket line until we get a fair contract.
Estimates say that strike at the 14 ports could cost upwards of $4.5 billion a day once it really kicks in. And with the presidential election just 35 days from today, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are sending some heavy hitters to Massachusetts this weekend to do some serious fundraising. Harris supporter, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, is set to appear at a breakfast in Boston on Sunday, while Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, will be the headliner at a big money fundraiser in Gloucester on Saturday afternoon. In sports, preseason hockey, the Bruins host the Flyers tonight at the Garden. In the forecast, cloudy mid-60s today.
For their businesses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/bankingforbusiness.
Welcome to Hour 3 of Boston Public Radio. I'm Jim Browdy. Sue O'Connell is sitting in for Marjorie. He'll be back in a couple of days. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Hello again, Sue.
Hello, Jim.
Hello, Sue. We're joined now on Zoom by the pride of Dorchester, John King. He is CNN's chief national correspondent behind great reporting projects all over the map, and he is all over the map. John King, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
He is home at the moment, but he's about to head to New York for the VP debate. And as you were noting in the newscast there, we count votes in 5 weeks. How about that?
It's incredible, actually.
Amazing. I like how you say count, because we are voting, many of us. So that's a good point. John, before we jump into the election conversation, obviously missiles, getting reports, breaking news that missiles have been launched from Iran to Israel. This report that is at CNN from the IDF. Just what a day. We've got a strike happening, and now this certainly, besides the obvious trauma and terror of it, puts another kind of curveball into the debate tonight and into the conversation of what's happening.
I think you're exactly right. If you just think about, if you are the president of the United States today, and that happens to be Joe Biden, you're dealing with a dock worker strike, a labor dispute, where he is, as he always likes to say, the most pro-labor president in history, and yet the economic impact of this strike could be billions of dollars a day, and it's 5 weeks before a presidential election where he hopes his vice president can win. And what's her biggest problem? Voters trusting her on the economy. So that's one job of the president of the United States. Then you have this global crisis that was already unfolding anyway. We're about to hit the one-year anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attack. There's a lot of criticism about Israel's response to that. Have they gone over the top? Are too many Palestinian civilians dying? Then it spreads into Lebanon against Hezbollah, and now Iran is launching missiles at Israel. So you have two giant crises that American leadership has to deal with, one at home and one on the world stage, and then you have voters deciding who gets that baton. Who gets that baton in January? Is it the Vice President of the United States, or is it Donald Trump? Do you give it back to Donald Trump? And on both of these kinds of issues, you have very different candidates, at least in their words. And so I do think it will change the tenor of the debate tonight. People don't vote for a vice president, but you'll see both candidates tonight trying to defend the person they think should be commander-in-chief or negotiator-in-chief. And for voters, I do think that there's been good news with interest rates cuts, bad news with this strike, a lot of turmoil around the world, whether the question is Ukraine or the Middle East. And you have two candidates who offer very different choices. So sometimes you cover elections and people say, well, they're all the same, or it all seems the same, or it all sounds the same. We don't have that election. We have pretty clear contrast here.
We do, but the thing that is doubly disappointing to me that Trump and Harris are not debating again is two guys are going to debate tonight. I'm guessing the lead question, as was Sue's to you, is about Iran launching this missile strike. And unless I forget something, neither of them has any foreign policy experience. I know that Walz, when he was in the House, was on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Obviously, they both voted on Defense Department appropriations. But again, you're talking to two people who don't have the experience. Obviously, Trump did, for better or worse, and Harris has been in the room where it happens. So it's a little disappointing to me. John, the conventional wisdom about tonight is that most vice presidential debates don't matter. This one may, both because of the closeness of the race and because, as of the moment, it's the final debate of election season. Where do you fall on the does it matter issue?
A couple quick things. One, to the point that they have no serious foreign policy experience. You're right about that, although both did serve in the military, and I think a lot of parents out there a lot of parents out there who might have children in the military will be watching for any clues from their experience. How do they view, how do they view American leadership and the role of the American military? Does it matter? Jim, what do I say almost every Tuesday, right? My experience tells me this, but remember, we live in this world where we live in a new world, so sometimes your experience is useless. My first campaign was 1988, as you well know, when Governor Dukakis was running. Yes, and remember, Lloyd Bentsen wiped the floor with Dan Quayle. That was the great exchange where, Dan Quayle likened himself to Jack Kennedy, and Lloyd Bentsen turned, and that was game, set, match, right? Jack Kennedy was my friend. You're no Jack Kennedy. See you later. Dan Quayle got wiped out in that debate. But the Bush-Quayle ticket went on to win 40 states. So I would say that history tells us vice presidential debates don't matter all that much. But you raise a very interesting point. As of now, there's not another presidential debate. there is, as Andrea noted, a lot of turmoil, a lot of big issues front and center right now. And so this is the last chance for a large audience to at least see the understudies, to see the number twos who will be representing the number ones. So does it matter a little bit more? Maybe. Maybe history tells us no, but as I say every Tuesday, sometimes we have to forget history because we're in a new place. So I do think that it probably matters a little bit more. Is it, does it factor in big decisions? Is it decisive? I doubt that, but let's watch. Let's see.
Also, one of the challenges around this, John King, is that the fact-checking and lack thereof. I spent the weekend dropping into X and trying to correct people that President Biden did indeed talk to Governor Kemp, regardless of what former President Trump lied about saying it, and that indeed the media was covering the Hurricane Helena and the damage, and indeed FEMA was responding. And I'm just wondering, obviously it's going to be another night of a bob and weave a bit for these candidates, and one in particular, I've been told by people that J.D. Vance, Senator Vance, is going to be digging into a kind of courtroom style of just saying it in the courtroom without worrying about whether it's true or not. Is this going to be helpful for the voters to have to figure out what's true and what's not true without fact-checking?
Well, two things. We'll see. Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan are two of the most experienced people in the business. They're both very good at what they do. You do have to make a decision about, how much do you do in real time and how much do you leave for after the fact? And I'll let CBS make their decision as they go forward. But these are two very good, experienced journalists who are not going to flinch in the moment. They'll have a strategy, and I may agree or disagree with everything in that strategy. We see that fact after the fact. But I will say, even though I may agree or disagree with some of the things they make, this is an enormously difficult thing to do, and you make decisions, and you think you're making the right decision, and there are a whole bunch of choices here. So I'm not criticizing them when I say that. I just think it's human nature. You're going to agree with some things and not agree with others, and then voters have to do it after the fact. Jim gets bored of me for doing this every Tuesday, but I also say to voters, is you have a supercomputer in your pocket. If something doesn't sound right, pick it up. Pick it up and do a little work on your own. Don't trust CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or GBH or anybody else. I mean, trust who you trust and watch who you watch, but then also do a little work on your own. If you can watch GBH and go to the library all at the same time, and go get a few books out and do the research. I say it jokingly, but in this age of misinformation, disinformation, polarization, citizens always have responsibility, but I would hope everybody understands. I tell this to my kids all the time. The bar's higher. The bar is higher because you're just being inundated with stuff, sometimes from the algorithm and sometimes from your phone. But you are right, sometimes from candidates for high office who are deliberately lying to you.
So, John King, 35 days. And another thing we've learned from you is every poll is just a snapshot in time. But the closer they get to Election Day, I would at least argue, the more they matter. Is there anything that you've seen in polling on the presidential front in the last week, let's say, that really stood out to you and was a surprise? Or is it essentially we have the same swing states? It's a dead heat in virtually all of them, give or take a couple of points. Anything that jumped out at you, John King?
Trump's numbers in some of the battleground states have improved marginally. Whereas I might have said 10 days ago, it's a dead heat race. If you put me on truth serum and made me, I won't bet more than a nickel, slight advantage Harris. Today, I might say slight advantage Trump, or at least he's taken away that what I might have said the slight advantage is Harris. That is just when you see, a new poll comes out that says, +2 in North Carolina. Now, again, as I say this, nobody call their bookie, number one, and nobody start throwing things. I hope no one's throwing things at YouTube or at the radio.
Only one of us.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
John. I say that do not invest in any one poll. As I always say, look for trajectory. And we've had a little bounce. Harris goes up. There's a couple polls that show Harris up a little tiny bit, and then there's a couple polls that show Trump coming back or a little tiny bit. All of these battleground states, I think Arizona might be at 5 points. Most of them are at 1 or 2 points. And what does that tell you? That tells you it's going to come down to energy, enthusiasm, turnout, and the possibility of something happening in 5 weeks. They tend to break. If you go back to 2016, I was looking at this yesterday. We have this path to 270 map we have based on our current projections. Right now, we have Harris at 225 and Trump at 219. So So you have a very competitive race. At this point in 2020, we had Joe Biden projected, if he carried what he was holding at this point, 5 weeks out, to win the presidency. And guess what? In 2016, we had Hillary Clinton projected to win the presidency. But she was leading outside the margin of error in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania at this point in 2016. She lost all three of those states. And so let's be open to the possibility of change. We live in this incredibly polarized, competitive environment where polls don't swing as much as they used to. But I also, like I said about the VP debate, just rule nothing out, which is why, will there be some event? Will Trump watch Vance tonight and say, I don't want him to have the last word. I want to do another debate. I don't rule that out. Harris would like one. There are some people who argue maybe she needs one. So we have 5 weeks. It's a blur, but it's also an eternity.
Talking to John King from CNN.
John, I want to talk with you about, some of the great reporting that you have been doing out on the road, talking to actual human beings and actual voters and following them through this process. You've got a piece at the CNN website, Harris's Georgia Challenge, Reassembling Biden's Diverse 2020 Coalition. I always laugh because I keep telling everybody, you've got Dick Cheney and Ayanna Pressley voting for Harris. How much more diverse do you really need to be? But as we look at Georgia, which is incredibly important, what are you learning from the voters who you're talking to there?
Pressley, Cheney, that is A to Z. You've got it. You have the whole spectrum there. So it's really fascinating when you look. I do think when Virginia went from red to purple to blue, the first swing constituency was Latino voters. The second big swing constituency was Asian voters. You're starting to see that in Georgia. The population is now above 4%. It's moving up to 5%. Obviously, the black vote is absolutely critical to Kamala Harris in Georgia. But then in a very competitive race, you're looking for those tiny swing constituencies. And so the Asian vote in the suburbs, if you drive through the Atlanta suburbs, you'll see little Vietnamese pockets, little Korean pockets, little Indian pockets. It's fascinating. The diversity, it's striking and it's beautiful and it's thriving. And you talk to the people who run the small businesses there. And that's right, to Jim's point earlier, I see it in the polls. I also see it anecdotally in these conversations. We walk into small businesses in both Nevada and in Georgia where the business people talk about how it's been a year now and my prices are still going up for my wholesale goods. And I've held off raising my prices, or I've only raised my prices a little bit because I don't want to lose my consumers. And they're frustrated. And some of those people say, I don't know about Kamala Harris. How would she run the economy? I don't like how Donald Trump talks. I don't like how he insults immigrants like me or children of immigrants like me, but I do know what he'll do with the economy. So you do pick up a little bit of that, what I call cost of living exhaustion. And so that's one of the things. But Georgia is, Joe Biden won it by 11,500 votes last time. I think it was 11,579. We can play him on tape if we have to get the exact number because we have that recording. But it's going to be that close again. That's how it feels anyway. Again, we'll see if it breaks. She needs, and you see among black women, if you want, what changed? Among the big things that changed when Biden got out and Harris got in, is the black community is one of the most reliable voting forces in America. It's one of the most reliable building blocks of the Democratic Party. But like everybody else in America, there's COVID exhaustion, inflation exhaustion, disaffection with Washington. The one big thing that's changed, and you see it when you're in Atlanta and the suburbs, is black women are very excited by the Harris candidacy. And I think if you have an enthusiasm, do all the Trump voters come out? So the things I'm looking for is enthusiasm, that little extra push on Election Day. That's how Obama won North Carolina in 2008. Does it make a difference for Harris in any of these battleground states in 2024? That's one of the things you watch, and Georgia's one of the places to watch it.
But so far, I'm sorry, Sue, Harris's numbers, correct me if I'm wrong, with black and Latino voters are good, very good, but not as strong as Biden's were in 2020. Is that right, John?
That is correct. In most of the polls, that is absolutely right. They're a little below. And again, I trace that back to the economy, not to any giant, we tend, sometimes we generalize people, or we put them in, black voters, white voters, Latino voters, women voters, men voters. If people are struggling from the economy, everybody is. If you're feeling the pain, in a community, everybody is. Georgia's doing pretty well economically, but I go back, I use this analogy a lot about 1992 when, George H.W. Bush was running around the country saying Bill Clinton and Ross Perot are wrong. The economy's back. The numbers are good. He was right. We had a pretty mild recession. The economy was back. The numbers were good, but people's legs were tired. Their mortgage rates had gone up. Their health insurance costs had gone up, and they were just tired. And they hadn't recovered from that body blow yet. And so even though the numbers in front of their face were good, their legs kept telling them they were tired and they wanted change. And in this election, voters want change. The challenge is, who's more change, the former president or the current vice president?
So, John, I know you spoke about this last week with Jim and Marjorie, but I have 2 weeks of use or lose NBC Universal vacation time that I have to use by the end of the year. And I'm very concerned about Georgia counting their votes. And one of the reasons I'm concerned about it is because the election board has been taken over by Make America Great folks. There's been some rules changed about opening every ballot and counting the ballots by hand, and what would happen if there's a challenge to this or that, and then this nightmare scenario that I've seen, that what happens if Georgia can't meet the deadline of counting the ballots? Do they send an elector? If they don't send their electors, then the House of Representatives gets to pick a president. My question is, can I go in December and January on vacation and have a presidential election called?
I would wait until December.
Oh my God!
I would not go. Look, I say that somewhat facetiously. Look, there's a lot of chaos out there, and there's going to be a lot of lawyers out there. And in different states, it's going to be different parties where the lawyers are rushing into court. There's no question about that. It's the world we live in. I say this all the time. I've been doing this for almost 40 years. The people who count votes across America in these counties, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or nonpartisan, they're doing the Lord's work and they're honest people. Do they make occasional mistakes? Yes. Do they make mistakes that throw presidential elections? No. I will say this about Georgia, that Brian Kemp is a Republican. Brian Kemp has tried to make détente, if not even peace, but détente with Donald Trump. Brian Kemp and the Secretary of State there also take very seriously their elections, which is why they stood up to Donald Trump last time. I do think this raises a new wrinkle, this possibility, and it's going to be challenged in the court. I would just say that when these things play out, in the past anyway, every time, even when it gets problematic like this or over the top, or I would argue in this case unnecessary, machines count votes. Machines count better than humans. They just do. That's why we invented them, and that's why we perfect them, and that's why we work on them all the time. There's less human error when you have a machine. They'll put eyeballs in the room so that each party has representatives in the room to watch this play out, so they can then, if they have to, go to court or go to the American people and document what happened. I hope we don't have a ton of that, but that's going to be the key, is making sure that everybody, the Trump campaign deserves people in the room, the Harris campaign deserves people in the room, the third-party candidates deserve people in the room, and maybe the media deserves people in the room. And if any nonpartisan group can say, we have a stake in this, fine, raise your hands, and you should have eyeballs in the room. I think the more transparency, the better. You're right. This is, in my view, an unnecessary, born of paranoia or born of just create an atmosphere where we can create doubt. There are some people out there who just keep adding things or saying things because they want to be able to create doubt, so that if they don't like the result, they can say it's rigged or fixed or poisoned or whatever. I don't like that, but it's the world we live in.
You know, the second loudest voice who said that 4 years ago, Rudy Giuliani, if people are interested, his daughter wrote a piece in Vanity Fair, which we'll discuss tomorrow, endorsing Kamala Harris and saying that Trump destroyed her father's life. It's really powerful piece. You should check it, Giuliani's daughter. John, I frankly, don't take this personally, am sick of only talking about the battleground states. So let's talk about Florida and Texas, which I never thought we'd talk about. A growing body of wisdom is that Rick Scott, the Republican in Florida, has a minuscule lead over his Democratic opponent, and that Ted Cruz, the new moderate Ted Cruz, who was in Cancun not too long ago, is in a virtual dead heat with a former pro football player and member of the House of Representatives. Am I overstating how close those races are in Florida and Texas, or no?
They're both competitive. I don't know that they're very, very, very close yet, but they're both competitive. And what does that tell you? I think it's a very important point you raised, and I'm glad you raised it. The disaffection with Washington and politics is everywhere. So we talk about it at the presidential level. People are mad, and so can Harris overcome the headwinds of inflation, or why isn't Washington doing more? Who are you? You're the vice president. People don't tend to pay much attention to the vice president, but it's everywhere. And you also have two states that demographically should be more competitive than they have been in the last decade. Part of that is dysfunction of state Democratic parties. Part of that has been sometimes bad candidates run by the Democrats, particularly against Ron DeSantis, for example. And so if you look at the demographics of, 10 years ago, Democrats were saying Texas is about to flip blue. Sure. And Florida once was. At this point, I mentioned that 2016 electoral map, Path to 270. In 2016 and 2020, we still had Florida as a battleground state, as a toss-up state. It's a red state now in presidential politics, is how we look at it. But if you look at the demographics, there's no reason those two states should not be competitive for Democrats. You've just had bad candidates or dysfunctional Democratic parties, and some Democrats are already arguing, throwing things at the radio. Republican legislatures and governors who adopt voting rules that make it harder for people to vote. There is some of that in those states. There's been big debates about voting rights in those states. But I think, we're talking about this razor-thin presidential race. I think there may be some other surprises out there when you look around the map. I can just tell you, this is from my travels. People are in a mood. It's not always anger. Sometimes it's actually very understated. It's just they're not mad because they don't think it's worth their time to get mad. They just think the system's broken, and I'm not going to let my blood pressure get up against that because they're all clowns. There's a lot of that out there. And I do think Biden stepping aside also might accelerate this generational change. We want new people. Yeah. Why do we look at the same people all the time? So I think there are a number of things in the water, if you will, that are gonna give us a few surprises on election night. John, I don't know that the Democrats are going to win those races, but I think a lot of places are going to be closer, and a lot of races are going to be closer than you might have thought 6 months ago.
John King, a number of pollsters have had the sort of breakthrough moment this year that saying the Latino vote is a lot like saying the white vote. I heard Celinda Lake actually say it on a podcast that the Latino vote, like the Asian American vote, is very, very different, and we need to stop lumping them into one group. But one thing that seems to be in common with across all constituencies is that men are showing a resistance to voting for Kamala Harris, whether they be Latino men, black men, white men, suburban men, city men. And I'm just wondering, are you hearing from anyone out there on the road, the great work you're doing for CNN, an articulation of what it is, or are we just feeling this sexism that we can't catch up with our Democratic cousins across the world who have voted for a woman as a prime minister or a leader much more quickly than we've been able to do?
Our neighbor Mexico is about to inaugurate a woman president. Look, so if you don't think some of it is sexism, I'd like to know the cave you're living in, because some of it is. Some of it is without a doubt. Very few voters are going to say that. I was just in Nevada, where you have, and I agree with the pollsters that nobody's a monolith, and the Latino population is a lot more complicated in Florida, for example, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Venezuelans, Mexicans, than it is in some other places where it's more Mexican Americans or Central Americans. So you have to be careful. You have to study, and overgeneralizing is a mistake. You do get, I think some of this is just the economy. People fondly remember, they might forget the COVID part, but there's this nostalgia for the pre-COVID Trump economy when interest rates were low and Trump signed those stimulus checks. Some of it's that. There is a macho, it's fading. I interviewed two guys who run this radio station out in Vegas, a Spanish language radio station. And they said there's sort of they think it's fading because they think their culture is progressing too. But sort of a macho thing that, where men are strong and Trump is strong. They both said that after the debate, a lot of their friends were like, whoa, she kicked his you-know-what. Maybe he's not so strong. And so I do think that's part of it. So I think there's a number of layers to it. And some of it is, to be fair, some of it is people who think Trump is better on the economy, and they're willing to put up with the other stuff to get that. But if you don't think, look, it was 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton just lost. The third-party candidate had something to do with that. She could have gone to Wisconsin a couple more times, maybe. But if you don't think that there was a slice of that were men refusing to vote for a woman for president, then again, when did Massachusetts finally get a female governor? Some places are moving more slowly than others, and our country's still a little behind on this one.
John, I have two last quick things for you. Sue and you talked briefly or mentioned the dock workers strike in the Gulf and here. And it seems to me this has potential to be huge in this race. As you said, and I think Biden is right when he says he's clearly the most pro-union president, maybe ever, but pretty clearly the most pro-worker, I would argue, too. So on one hand, if they're on strike more than a few days, it could do real damage to the economy, which, as you say, is the number one issue in voters' mind, which would mean real trouble for Harris. On the flip side, if Biden chose to avoid that and he can't broker a deal, he does have the power, I think it's under the Taft-Hartley Act, under something, to order them back to work, which would enrage much of organized labor, which is critical to her success. How does Biden-Harris thread the needle here?
They are at the White House very much hoping that in a few days they can get a deal. They think that they were far enough, they were so far apart on wages that the unions needed to do this to make the point. They needed to prove they would go on strike. They needed to plant the flag. But they don't think they're so far apart that they can't get them into a room after 24 or 48 hours. So if we're having this conversation next Tuesday, when we are 4 weeks out from the election, I think then we start talking about what happens. You're right. And Trump has tried to make a play for the labor vote. And yet in Erie, Pennsylvania, as blue-collar a place as you can get in America, he was saying the other day about how he hated to give people raises. His campaign targets an audience, and then he opens his mouth a lot about how he didn't like to pay people. Okay, my dad was a union guy, not far from you guys at the old Charles Street Jail. Yep. It's a luxury jail now. He was a union guy who fought for wages. And I remember a few work issues with Kevin White and others in the great Suffolk County back in the day. I think I'm making some jokes about family history and about things Trump says, but economically this could be of huge consequence. And again, welcome to being president of the United States. Yeah. Things come across your desk at unfortunate times, and you got to deal with them. I would say if we're talking about this next Tuesday in form of a strike, and in terms of supply chains going down, and in factories being closed because they can't get things, and car dealerships being closed because or not having supplies because they can't get things, then we're having a different conversation.
So we have 30 seconds. I don't know if you're aware, your hometown team didn't make the baseball playoffs. You know that, correct? Okay, good.
Yeah.
My hometown team did make the playoffs.
He's got his glove, everybody.
Okay. Oh, my God.
He's got his baseball mitt.
For spring training.
This is pathetic. He's thrown out the first.
I saw Breslow, Kennedy, and Cora saying they're ready to upgrade the team as necessary. So I'm just making sure.
Yeah, I think they were ready last year, too, weren't they? I'm not sure, but except not Breslow.
Put me in, Coach.
My team.
You want me to say go Phillies? I know you.
Exactly, I do. Who's going to be the World Series champion? Is it my boys?
You know what? They're a very, very solid team, and so I'm happy since our guys are out, and I can't root for the Yankees. So let's go Phillies.
Thank you, my friend.
Good job, John
I
King.
love that. Hey, John, we'll be watching tonight in New York. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
John King is the CNN chief national correspondent behind the great reporting of the project all over the map this election cycle. Up next, we're going to open the lines and get your thoughts on this season of death. That's right, fall. It's upon us. Cider donuts, corn mazes, 15-foot skeletons. Are you enjoying or bemoaning our turn to the cold winter months? You can call or text us. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the BPL and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
California has been cracking down on homeless encampments after the Supreme Court upheld local bans on camping in public spaces.
I got held up for an umbrella that was covered over with a tarp. Ever since they passed whatever law they passed for being homeless, we're gonna get arrested.
I'm Elsa Chang. What that looks like on the streets of San Francisco on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And the University of New England, offering undergraduate and graduate programs in Portland, Maine, on the ocean in Biddeford, Maine, in Morocco, and online. The University of New England, une.edu. And Furniture Consignment Gallery, committed to the circular economy for over 30 years. Current inventory is available to view in their showrooms in Burlington, Natick, Hanover, and Plymouth. More at FurnitureConsignment.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Brady, Sue O'Connell's, sitting in for Marjorie. We're live at the library streaming.
You okay?
Excuse me, I think I'm youtube.com/GBH News. So it happens every year, and still somehow I am disrupted by it. Cold, dark mornings, Halloween decorations, and candy showing up on the shelves months before. Well, now it's not months before, but a month. And annoying pumpkin spice flavored everything, and the fall traditions don't stop there. To me, the only good thing to come out of this is our apple cider donuts, which I totally love. Sue is a different kind of character, generally more cheery and upbeat than me. And she actually enjoys some of the October and fall traditions. There's pumpkin spice, there's apple picking, which is torture. There are corn mazes, that sort of thing. We want to know which of the fall traditions are ones you and your family really look forward to and why, and which you dread but feel forced to do because you want to please the kids or the partner or the whatever. 877-301-8970. So I assume you like apple cider donuts.
I have a bunch of them at home right now.
Oh, from where?
From Honey Pot Farms in Stowe.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so we agree on that.
Yep.
How about the other things? How do you feel about going into a corn maze? Marjorie wrote a piece in 2011. The second paragraph, she's in a corn maze. They send her, I don't know where, Connor's Farm, wherever that is, Danvers.
Yep, been
Yet
there.
a near hysterical mother, this is in the corn maze, called 911
I understand that.
at about 6 p.m. to report that her family, including her newborn, were indeed lost and panicking, though 25 feet from the corn maze entrance. How do you feel about corn mazes?
So I haven't been in a lot of corn mazes in my lifetime,
However.
but just 2 weekends ago,
No.
I was at Honey Pot Farms in Stowe with my delightful colleague Colton Bradford.
Oh, from your station
From my
there.
station, the great anchor in the afternoon and in the mornings, and with one of our colleagues and with my daughter Ruby. And Colton, who is from the South, didn't believe that this was not a corn maze, it was a hedge maze. And he did not believe that just because it was called the Monster Hedge Maze that we needed a map or that we should stay together. So he wanted to go in separately without a map, but I overruled that. And we were only in there for like 35 minutes, wandering around, trying to find our way out until I took the map from him, reminded him that I was a lesbian, took over, got my lesbian card punched, and we were out in 5 minutes. So
that's not the answer to the question.
I
Was
may
that
not
fun?
go to another. It's fun now. I'm getting paid to tell the story. I mean, how great is that?
That is fun.
The maze. I also have a minor maze, but yes, I do enjoy the festivities and behaviors around fall.
How about apple picking?
Yes,
Explain to me the joy of apple picking. By the way, I don't know if you're aware.
Yeah.
You know you can go to Whole Foods or Market Basket and you can apple pick right there. You know that, correct?
Indeed. So we also apple pick that day.
Oh, how nice.
And my daughter Ruby enjoys having a complete, kind of festival at home.
Oh.
So we went apple picking. We made an apple pie over the weekend.
Oh, you did not.
Yes, we did. I didn't bring you a slice today, but yes, because we have to eat it all first. So we got 3 different kinds of apples. Colton did some. He's tall, so that was helpful to have him.
Can reach a little further up
Yep,
to the
yep.
apples.
So we did go apple picking.
really
Yes.
nice.
So I've been apple picking.
Nobody
I've got the
cares about
cider
that.
donuts. We've had
Okay.
a hard cider, and we've been in a hedge.
Okay, but how about pumpkin spice? That's the last one I'm going to ask.
I don't really enjoy the artificial flavoring.
Ooh.
I don't like my coffee
No.
with the pumpkin spice,
you
but I
don't.
do enjoy the pumpkins. We'll be going to Wardberry Farm in Sharon soon to get our pumpkins.
You getting paid to advertise
I'm
these
not,
places?
and I'm going
No.
to pay full price for
Okay.
something. I also enjoy the business model where that you have to pay them to do the labor to get the things that you would purchase at the market. So
That's
it
a
works
very
out
good
even
point.
very well. And then you get to buy. There's animals there, goats and
Pet
stuff
them.
like that. Well, you pay to get food to feed them. So you're actually, again, buying the food to do the labor. So
That's
it
an
works
excellent
out
point.
well.
I'm not sure I understand that. But in any case, so I like apple cider donuts. There's no other. We left one out.
What's that?
Foliage, leaf peeping.
You-
That
yeah.
is begin. Well, don't speak for me here. You're about to say you. Well, let's talk about you first, and
Yes.
then we'll talk about me. Go ahead.
I have not had as much foliage experience as I'd like to, but there was a time in the 80s when I was up in Littleton, Bethlehem, New Hampshire, regularly enjoying the Great White Mountains, and I love foliage. I would love to take a helicopter ride through the White Mountains at the peak foliage. How about
now,
you, Jim?
do you subscribe to the Boston Globe?
I do indeed.
Do you know that about 18 times in October, if you pick up the Globe, there'll be a photograph on the front page
Yes.
of that very same foliage.
Yes.
So you can actually see it.
It's not like you have
and
to
sit
experience
on your couch.
it. Of course, it was the 80s, so I might have been in a different state of mind at the time, but it was very vivid.
Okay, well, you're a fall kind of woman. And we're not discussing how horrible fall is because it's before winter. Marjorie and I will do that in a few days. We're talking about the traditions of fall in October that people like Sue are really enamored of and people like me are not.
Okay, let's take a look at here's a texture right here.
What did he or she say?
October is magical. The crisp air, the leaves swirling in the wind, the cuddles on the couch with scary movies. The only thing bad about October is the damn leaf blowers. I'm with you on that. They ruin it for me. Knock it off already.
How
Isn't
about
that
this
delightful?
one? This person, I think, speaks for me. An anonymous texter. We'll get to your calls in a minute. 877-301-8970. Nothing like paying $40 for 2 pounds of apples, and I also wish pumpkins would go extinct.
It's the experience.
Now that's an angry person.
Yes,
let's
but
face
it's the
it.
experience. I mean, there's nothing quite like hauling a ladder through an orchard without paved roads in order to
that's
go
really great.
climb up to get that
Can't
perfect apple. And then
Okay.
it's so delightful to eat it right off the tree.
Yeah,
Jim.
it's really exciting, delightful. Let's go to Amanda in a car. You're first. We're talking about fall traditions and whether you enjoy them or not. Hello there, Amanda. Hi.
Hi there. It's so funny you mentioned foliage.
Yeah.
I just saw the foliage over the Tobin. It was gorgeous.
Oh.
Yes, it's beautiful today.
That's nice.
But our favorite tradition used to be apple picking, but we did just go this weekend to do pumpkin patch selection, and it was at Wardsbury Farm.
Mm-hmm.
It was super fun. They have hay rides, and they have spiced cider drinks for the adults, and it was very fun.
You know what I love, Amanda,
it's a fun thing to pick out your own pumpkin.
Yeah, it's. I love how they have the same pumpkins out in the field. I figured this out after a couple of years, as they do at the cash register. So you don't really need to go out to the field to get them. Although it is fun carrying a 50-pound pumpkin on a hayride.
Well, wait a second. That undercuts your whole deal. You don't have to go to the counter either. You go to the supermarket. What?
Yeah.
Wait, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the kids. Sorry, I was going to say the kids love to pluck them from the vine.
That's nice.
They actually
is
go
nice.
pick one that's still attached. And then we rode a tractor. We didn't carry them back, so we were lazy about it, but it was nice.
Amanda, you made the case beautifully. I don't
See,
agree
Jim,
with you,
don't
but
you
that
wanna
was
go?
lovely.
Okay, I guess so.
Now, here's an anonymous texter who says, I love apple picking. I love getting dressed up in my flannel and cute boots, getting the kids all dressed up, even trying to get the husband to go. The kicker, here's me speaking, those apples just rot on the counter through Thanksgiving. Isn't that exactly what happens?
No, I just made an apple pie.
You didn't make an apple
I did.
pie.
I made
You
an
have a
apple
photograph
pie.
of the
No,
apple
I
pie?
don't. If my daughter actually listened to me on the radio, she would send a picture of the apple
But
pie.
no
But
way
I
she's
will.
listening, of
I
course.
also, what I love about the fall festivities in New England and
What
in
are they?
Boston area specifically, Ruby and I, my daughter, love nothing more than if we go apple picking like the second week of September, and all the college students from the West Coast and the South come, and they're all dressed in flannel and boots and coats, and it's 85 degrees, and they are just melting because they can't understand why, if they're apple picking and it's September in New England, why is it so hot?
That's
so
an
that's
excellent
really
point.
exciting.
They deserve it. Brianna in Amesbury, you're next on Boston Public Radio. Hey, Brianna, what's up?
Hi, I love fall.
Okay.
And I think one of our favorite traditions is going to the Topsfield Fair.
Oh.
There you go. See? That's another one.
Well,
What do you
I
see?
went to the Topsfield Fair when my kids were little. You see like the 600-pound pumpkin. That's sort of fun, right?
The secret is letting my kids skip a day of school so we can beat the crowds too.
Oh.
I couldn't do it if it was a weekend day.
And the Big E, another great event, a Massachusetts event. Brianna, do you take Route 1 when you go to
Who cares how she gets there?
Because it's a secret. You don't
Oh,
ever want to
sorry.
take Route 1 to get to the Topsfield Fair,
How do you get
right?
to the Topsfield Fair?
We do take Route 1.
Okay, all right. Well, you go to a weekday. That's why.
So,
you're
Brianna, you didn't say, other than the kids getting a day off from school, which is very nice, even though it's illegal, what's your favorite part of the Topsfield Fair?
Probably a mix of the animals.
Yeah.
I know. I get a little overwhelmed with the food choices. But
They have competitive
Brianna, you're great. Thank you for the call. Appreciate it.
4-H animals like
that's
chickens
great.
and
That's
chicks.
really
They're
great.
gorgeous.
It's
You
great.
know, there's a wide variety of hens. You have no idea about this. So this is very exciting.
Okay, so someone who wrote this note about Friday, who wrote? Zoe. Zoe, it's opening day Zoe's our coworker, I assume you know now. It's opening day this Friday, but the weather says it's going to be 75, which fills me with so much generational pain. It used to be freezing cold. Oh,
Well, it's never. Listen, I know it's hotter now, but
hotter.
it's always, you could always get a 75 or 80 degree day in September. So that's exciting, you know.
So here's more Zoe. Do you want to hear more Zoe?
Yeah, let's hear more
she
Zoe.
actually appears to be into this. I got a bunny at the Topsfield Fair with my money I made. You know, she worked at Market Basket. With her Market Basket job, her mother was pissed.
Yeah.
So what's the point of that story?
Well, it's just a very nice kind of wildlife. And I mean, you get to commune with nature and stuff in fall. It's nice to be outside. I mean, finally, even when you have your hot days, the air is crisp, the sun is going down, you get to snuggle in, you can set a fire. Okay,
fine. Now, you went to the Big E. Have you ever been to the Big E in your life? I don't think so.
Yes, but...
When?
1987.
So why would you mention... Is it great?
Well, it doesn't count if I were on the debate stage.
37 years ago.
If I was on the debate stage and you asked me if I had gone and I said no, you'd expect Jamie to fact check me.
How many of you in the audience went to the Big E this year? How many?
One.
Oh, one. Yeah, it's a huge attraction. Is that one person?
It's a huge attraction.
Huge attraction.
Yes.
I know. It's
incredible.
And
it's incredible, great things to do there.
And Sue's position, which I respect, is she goes every 37 years, which I think is just about right. Maybe a little too frequently, but that's fine.
I'm just going to say a number of folks are pointing out there are a number of orchards across Massachusetts. We've got apple picking at Russell Orchards. That's one. There's also, I think we mentioned the Danvers location. So folks are just really saying all their favorite places that they like to go, Jim, to pick the apples that they will then eat. You know, if you want to pick some and then, bring them into work for your staff, I'm sure they would really enjoy them.
I prefer not to do that. Now, one last thing. Can we spend 30 seconds on the cider donut? Is that a pastry? What do you call that thing? A baked good?
Yeah, it's a pastry.
A pastry, okay.
It's a donut.
Is there anything more, assuming it's not too much sugar, I don't like a lot of sugar on it. I'm serious, is there anything tastier than a cider donut?
No, I don't think so. It's why you wait in line for like 35 minutes just to get 4 of them.
How about when they're a little bit warm, when they've just come out of the oil or whatever the hell it is they do with them?
Look at this, Mass Live reporting. Oh, where'd it go?
There it is.
The Big E broke an all-time attendance record in 2024, Jim.
Yeah.
You know who goes to the Big E?
Yes.
1,633,935 attendees over 2.5 weeks.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you say that. 1.6 million people went. Did you see the most recent census in the globe, Massachusetts? 1.6 million people, the exact same number, live in their mother's basements. I mean, is that incredible, the comparison there? Gene in Salem, we're talking about the wonders of fall come October and all the great traditions. Where do you fall in that there, Gene?
Well, I'm driving in Salem right now. Maybe I'll pull over just to be safe.
Please, I wish you would.
I'll run a couple of these extra witches down. I don't really care for Halloween.
Okay.
I'm a first-time caller, but I agree with you.
Oh, thank you.
I don't like pumpkin spice.
Yeah, no.
I don't like pumpkin carving.
No.
I don't like corn mazes.
No.
I love cider donuts.
Okay.
Oh.
And I love cider with those cider donuts. You need to try that.
Wait, what did you say about cider donuts?
Well, the cider donuts are great with cider. Most places that sell cider donuts, like Russell Orchards, have the fresh cider, fresh apple cider.
Loves apple
So
cider.
that's fantastic. Other than that, tomorrow, if you love all the things that I hate, you should go to Salem, Mass.
What's going on
because
there?
they're going to have some. No, I mean, I think it's Saturday, actually. They're going to have like a marching of the ghouls.
Oh.
And traffic is going to be stopped, and the roads are going to be blocked off. So I'm going to Maine.
Gene, that was an excellent first
Person
call.
after your
I love
own
your
heart,
attitude.
Jim.
I
There
was
you
just going to
go.
say thank you very much for the call. The number's 877-301-89. I'm really sorry we didn't work to project this photograph. There's a photograph that was on the front page of the Herald on October 13th of 2011 with Marjorie attempting to sort her way with a half smile through a corn maze at Connor's Farm in Danvers kind of thing. What do you think of those people calling 911?
I can understand how it happened. I mean, I was telling Colton when we went in, and he was saying...
What's with you and Colton?
We're like very best friends. He's kind
You
of...
said his name like 12
Colton
times.
Bradford
I know who he
from
is.
NBC 10
Yeah,
Boston. We actually share an ancestor from
Who is
Salem,
that? Who's that?
Massachusetts, the Bradfords.
Oh, Governor Bradford?
From 16, a long time ago. Anyway, so we call ourselves cousins. We dress alike a lot at work. It's really very annoying.
really
It's very
great.
serious, the work we do at the NBC News, I'll tell you. But anyway, I said to Colton when we went in, we have to take a map because there have been 2 occasions that people have called 911 being trapped inside of the corn maze or the hedge maze. There was another, I think, local weather person who went in with his family and ended up having to call 911. So when you're in there, it makes perfect sense how it happens. Colton will also be paying for my daughter Ruby's future therapy because he gave her such an anxiety attack in there. So that's
nice.
good. Yes,
perfect. By the way, just as a public service, in light of what that caller just said, the annual Salem Zombie Walk is a free event. We always support free events. On this Saturday, October 5th at 11 o'clock. Now, Chloe, our number is 877-301-8970. You can text or call there. Chloe from Southbridge says the best parts of the Topsfield Fair are the bunny barn. You imagine what that smells like, by the way?
It's just... I was at the bunny barn in Las Vegas. I don't think it was the same. 9 o'clock show is totally different from the 7. I'll continue, Jim.
Okay.
The Dahlia Show. Again, the Dahlia Show also. I saw that in Las Vegas. The maple cotton candy. If you can't find those things, then, Jim, you are truly a curmudgeon.
No, it's the bunny barn is really something. And maple cotton candy. By the way, let's talk about that for a second. I'm sorry to digress. Cotton candy. Where would you rate cotton candy on the list of worst things ever invented in the history of humankind?
See, I have an emotional attachment to cotton candy.
Why is that?
Well, because I grew up on Revere Beach when the amusement parks were there, and my mother would be able to get me free cotton candy on a regular basis.
What, she stole it?
No, it's a long story. But anyway, we would go to the concessions, and I'd get free cotton candy all the time, and I loved it because it just evaporates in your mouth, and if it's free, it's great.
Yeah, but the issue with cotton candy, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have the level of expertise you have, if it gets in your mouth, I think it's a satisfactory experience, even if it's too sweet. The problem is it also gets all over your face.
Well, you're not supposed to eat it past like age 7, Jim, I think, which is part of it. So if it's all over your face, you don't care, right? Okay,
fine.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, here's another anonymous texter, if you don't mind. I see your point about fall traditions and why you can sit at home and not enjoy life. I'm with you. But knowing that I could go to the library and see you in person instead of experiencing you from my home radio just makes me giddy having the opportunity of meeting a true celebrity. Like, please, in the end, I am staying home. What was the point of that text exactly? Jamie, do you understand what that person was saying? Or
is he going to buy the tickets to come to the library?
We have no idea what they're talking about. Now, here's another one.
You don't need tickets to come to the library.
Anonymous texter, favorite autumn roadside sign ever north of Portland, Maine. I love Portland, Maine, which has nothing to do with fall, by the way, but whatever. Outside an auto repair shop, the sign reads, pumpkin spiced brake pads are here. That's actually fairly amusing in an unamusing way.
I'm against the whole pumpkin spice and apple spice stuff. All the flavoring and the candles and all that. I'm not a big fan of that.
Do you know anybody who really loves it? My thesis, if I may, is nobody really loves it. They love the idea of it because it signifies something special.
I guess. I'm against it.
We haven't talked about Colton for a while, whoever he is. Does he like pumpkin spice things or not?
No, I think Colton goes like straight ahead. He gets his cup of coffee every morning in the same place in Dorchester. He picks up his Boston Globe. Yeah, he's got a nice little routine going for himself.
Do you want to talk any more about him?
I could talk all day about Colton Bradford.
I'm sure. What's with you and what is the deal?
He's the future of broadcasting.
Why is that?
Because he's so great and he's very
Why do you keep looking at Jamie when you say he's the future of broadcasting? What does he have to do with the future of broadcasting?
I know Jamie's a fan.
Oh, you like Colton too? What is that? What, you're turning red. What is this? Oh, Jamie's testing me now. Oh, because he's looking
Jamie is not the future of broadcasting.
You know what I learned last night? I know this has nothing to do with anything. So I texted Jamie, and I think people listen to the show. The understanding we have here is when I text Jamie, I expect as soon as I've hit send, the phone will ring.
Yeah.
I mean, that's roughly the amount of time he has. He texted me and said he could not call me back right away. Would it be fine to call me between 5 and 5:30? The answer is no, it wasn't fine, but I said it was. And guess what he, who is not the future of broadcasting according to himself, guess what he was doing yesterday prior to 5? Can I say this or not? And after 5:30? What was he doing?
I don't know. I'm
teaching journalism to freshmen at BC. Is that Boston College? I mean, what about that? What do you think? What do you think of that, everybody?
That's a skill and
by the way, the amazing statistic he said to me after the second class last night, only 73% of the students dropped out, which is really for the 27%. Congratulations, that's really it's great. Now, yesterday I made a big mistake, Sue, which I rarely admit. I said, I know more about Jared.
He makes a lot of mistakes, but he just rarely admits it.
You don't need to repeat that. Thank you. So the point I tried to make yesterday is I know more about Jared Bowen than Jared Bowen knows about Jared Bowen. And whatever it was buying things at, whatever those things are called, yard sales. And I predicted that Jared has never come near a yard sale, much less bought something. And he proceeded to say that half of his apartment that he's never invited me to is, or his condo, is filled with stuff from yard sales. So here's what I will predict.
Yard sale or estate sale?
No, that's a caller made that distinction. But before we get to Jared, here's my prediction today. Let me get on the list. He likes leaf peeping because it's sort of artsy. He hates pumpkin spice. And he hasn't apple picked since he was 11.
Okay.
Those are my predictions. And here he is, the host of the Culture Show, Jared Bowen. How close was he? Was I?
Yes, yes, no.
Which was the no?
I routinely went apple picking with my nieces and nephew up until a couple of years ago. So I have spent a lot of time in recent years apple picking. But no, I was thinking, actually, I have to tell you, Jim, I was thinking about this last night. I thought you really do know me very well, although I know you well because I knew I was going to trip you up yesterday.
You did trip me up yesterday. And what do you find? So you don't find pumpkin spice appealing. What was the other thing I said? Oh, foliage. Where are you on foliage? You like foliage?
I do like it, yeah.
Okay, when was the last time you went and saw it?
I don't know.
20 years ago.
When I'm driving down the road? I mean, it's everywhere.
Okay.
Good point.
What are you doing on that show thing?
We have Colton Bradford on the show today.
Was he singing or are you just playing a recording?
He's a fan, too. He's a fan of Colton.
Who is this guy?
We're just having him on the show because
Really?
he's just so fabulous. He doesn't have to sing or paint or anything.
Okay.
No, we're going to start with...
Woody, Woody the UPS driver just texted, can Colton co-host the show tomorrow with Jim? Sure, why not? Okay, I'm sorry, Jack. What are you doing this afternoon again?
I have been out with Colton, actually. He is a very nice guy.
He's a wonderful guy. Okay, go ahead.
We are talking with a group. This is really fun. The Good Trouble Brass Band came all the way to GBH for a rousing performance in advance of Honk Fest, which happens.
Love Honk Fest. Love Honk Fest.
Their music is so fun. It's New Orleans inspired. And then we're going to talk to the town crier of Provincetown. Did you know that there are still town criers proclaiming the news all throughout the country, including in Provincetown?
I spend tons of time there's a person who walks down Commercial Street yelling out the news?
Well, you can't miss him because he's dressed as a Puritan who just got off the Mayflower.
Well, what else? By the way, I just saw a picture of Colton. He is one fine-looking specimen there. Let me tell you, I'm sure he's really talented.
Nice.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, quickly, what else you got going there?
And then we'll have the star and director of the new play Laughs in Spanish.
Oh, you spoke glowingly of that. Jared, it's good to see you, and good to see you. I said that already. Okay. Sue, you were fabulous, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, and let's hear it for Sue. Thanks for listening to another edition of Boston Public Radio, and thanks for everybody who came down to the library. Really appreciate it. Keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast, or check out our TikTok page at Boston Public Radio. Tune in tomorrow. Oh, Jared's on. GBH's Jared Bowen. Harvard National Security expert Juliet Kayyem. The timing is obviously really important there in light of what's happening in the Middle East. Embrace Boston's Amari Paris Jeffries and Michael Curry of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers. Our crew is Zoe Matthews, Aidan Conley, Nicole Garcia, Hannah Loss, engineer John Parker. Our executive producer is Jamie Bologna. Special thanks to our BPL staff, Brad Lewis, Patrick Lally, Juan Jose Cardena, and Olivia Corcio. Thanks to our host of the Newsfeed Cafe, the wonderful people over at the Lenox Hotel. Stay tuned to The Culture Show with Jared Bowen, starting right at 2 here on 89.7. I am Jim Browdy.
I'm Sue O'Connell.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you tomorrow at the library, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.
What's trending? What's interesting? What's going on around town? We're talking all things arts and culture on The Culture Show, next on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and the Peabody Essex Museum.
Explore the little-known story of the second highest office in the land, tracing its evolution from a constitutional afterthought to a position of political consequence. Catch American Experience, The American Vice President, tonight at 8 on GBH2.
Classical Radio Boston is WCRB-FM 99.5 HD1 Lowell, Boston, WGBH-FM HD2 Boston, WCAI-FM HD2 Woods Hole, WJMF-FM Smithfield, Providence, and at classical.org.